Chapter 458. After resting for a day, Bailey-Jiang he gathered the 10 sword heroes, the 10 elders, and the Honorable Sword Saint Chin Bu to the main hall of the East Sage Palace. When Chu Mu and the others arrived at the main hall, the other sword manners had just arrived. The 10 sword manners lined up in order, waiting for the people from the East Sage Palace to appear. The battle for fortune that happened once every 10 years was of great importance. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to host it. If the 10 sword manners were to host it, the other sword manners wouldn't feel at ease. If the 10 sword manners were to send out a group of people to host it, it would inevitably lead to some disputes. The best way was to send someone unrelated to the 10 sword manners to host it. Furthermore, they must have sufficient strength and status. After thinking about it, only the people from the East Sage Palace had the qualifications to host it. If one had to say which power was the strongest in the entire East Sword domain, it would undoubtedly be the East Sage Palace. This old man is very honored to be the judge of this year's battle for fortune. An old man appeared in the main hall of the East Sage Palace and said with a smile. The aura on his body was obscure and undetectable. This year's battle for fortune will still be held at the Heaven Battling Sword Arena in the East Sage City. At that time, you will have an exciting battle under the eyes of everyone. The Heaven Battling Sword Arena was the largest sword arena in the East Sage City. It also belonged to the East Sage Palace and could hold 1 million people at the same time. The most peculiar thing was that the Heaven Battling Sword Arena occupied a very small area in the East Sage City because it was a half-void boundary. The battle for fortune that happened once every 10 years was a grand event in the entire East Sword domain. The news had already spread out. Many powerful swordsmen had come here to witness this grand event that happened once every 10 years. An exciting battle between 100 sword heroes. A battle between sword heroes was already very rare. How lucky was it to be able to watch a battle between 100 sword heroes at such a close distance? If they missed it, they would be so regretful that they would kill themselves. Not only was it an honor to watch a battle between 100 sword heroes, they might even be able to comprehend something from it. It would be helpful to improve their sword arts or cultivation. Not long after, under the lead of the East Sage Hall's Elder Tang, the swordsmen from the 10 great sword manners entered the heaven-deciding sword field. Then many swordsmen who wanted to watch the battle for karmic luck also entered. Although the heavenly decisive sword field could hold 1 million people, there were more than 1 million people who wanted to watch. A group of people flooded into the gate and entered the heavenly decisive sword field. The heaven battling sword field was surrounded by trapezoidal seats, which were spacious enough. Fortunately, we managed to snatch the sword token to enter the heaven extinguishing sword field half a year ago. Otherwise, I'm afraid we could only stay outside this time. An exciting battle between 100 sword heroes. These 10,000 mid-grade spirit stones were well spent. I really hope that the duel will start soon. There's no hurry. This is the once-in-a-decade battle for karmic luck. Before the battle begins, there are still many important segments that must be completed. Otherwise, the battle of karmic luck this time will be nothing, said the swordsman who had watched the last battle of karmic luck in the past. He seemed to know the ins and outs of the battle very well. What segment? Someone nearby was immediately intrigued and asked with great interest. Soon you will see it with your own eyes, the man said mysteriously. Heavenly Sword of Destiny. Elder Tang floated in the air above the heaven-battling sword field. He opened his arms as if he wanted to embrace the entire world. His voice was grand and imposing, spreading throughout the entire heaven-battling sword field like rolling thunder. Chin Bu the supreme sword venerable, was among them. Chu Mu swept his gaze across them and discovered that the auras of the other 9 were also very obscure. Thinking about it, they should also be sword venerables. Chun Bu and the others waved their hands, and a beam of light shot out into the sky. The 10 beams of light formed a circle and rotated slowly. Wave after wave of vast aura swept out like a cool breeze, filling the entire heaven-deciding sword field. Everyone who was bathed in this unique aura felt the distracting thoughts in their minds disappear. Their minds became extremely clear, their ears and eyes became sharp, and their bodies also became light, as if they had been stripped of all their baggage. The power of destiny. This is the power of destiny. A small number of swordsmen who knew the details all roared out. Even though they knew it was only a temporary effect, the feeling was just too wonderful. Under the influence of the power of destiny, a small number of swordsmen immediately felt their bottlenecks loosen, as if they could break through at any time. Chu Mu and the others were already supported by the power of destiny that surpassed ordinary swordsmen. Now that they bathed in the vast power of destiny, they only felt like their power of destiny had been activated and strengthened several times over. For a moment, various comprehensions appeared in their heads. Unfortunately, this lasted for too short a time. Before Chu Mu and the others could comprehend anything, the vast power of destiny suddenly converged and gathered on the 10 small swords at the very top of the heaven-battling sword field again. They shone brightly and created a myriad of phenomena. Following that, earth-shaking dragon roars rang through the sky. The 10 heaven-battling swords of destiny shook and turned into 10 golden dragons, soaring above the heaven-battling sword field. Destiny dragons. Every swordsman below looked up at the 10 golden dragons. They all had looks of admiration, awe, or greed. This was the power of destiny that was so dense that it had condensed into substance. The power of destiny contained within was unimaginable. The 10 destiny dragons varied in length. The shortest was 12 meters long, while the longest was 150 meters long. The others were 130 meters long, 120 meters long, 110 meters long, and so on. All in all, the total length of the 10 destiny dragons was exactly 99 meters long. 99 meters was an extreme number. Legend had it that once it broke through 300 meters, there would be some kind of unpredictable change. No one knew if the change was good or bad. The shortest destiny dragon, that was 40 meters long, belonged to the Great Kuin Sword Mansion, while the longest belonged to the Great Qian Sword Mansion. Every inch of difference in the destiny dragons would result in an obvious difference in the power of destiny contained within, let alone a difference of 33 meters. How great would it be if I could obtain one of the destiny dragons? Many people had such thoughts. Just think about it. Even if they obtained the shortest destiny dragon that was 40 meters long, the unimaginably vast power of destiny would be enough for them to become a supreme prodigy since ancient times. From then on, their path would be smooth sailing, and it was even possible for them to become a sword saint or an even higher existence. Unfortunately, it was only a fantasy. Since ancient times, there had never been a case where the power of destiny could be controlled. At most, it would be a slight influence caused by humans. Moreover, whoever had the most destiny dragons had the most destiny dragons. Everything had long been predestined. Forcefully adding destiny dragons to one's body would only lead to one's destruction in the end. Not everyone could bear the power of destiny dragons. To use the simplest analogy, it was like a lot of treasures. If someone with power and influence obtained treasures, it would be like adding wings to a tiger. If someone without power and influence obtained treasures, it would be an unexpected disaster. Everyone's gaze was attracted to the 10 destiny dragons. They were like iron shavings attracted by magnets, unable to look away. The 10 destiny dragons of different lengths constantly swam in the sky. They were extremely fast, and they left behind streaks of golden light that crisscrossed in the sky. Immediately after, the 10 destiny dragons let out dragon roars that resounded through the clouds. In the next moment, a strange scene occurred. The 10 destiny dragons were devouring each other. In a short span of 3 breaths, the 10 dragons of Providence had vanished. Only a huge golden dragon that was 999 meters long remained. Waves of majestic dragon roars resounded, impacting everyone. Let's invite the 100 participating sword heroes onto the stage. Elder Tang of the East Sage Hall reacted and shouted at the same time as the dragon roars. Chu Mu and the other 100 sword heroes from the 10 great sword manors woke up one after another. They executed their movement techniques and landed on the huge sword battle arena, standing in their respective camps. The 999-meter-long Luck Dragon circled around in the sky before diving down, creating a loud sonic boom. Powerful airflow blasted out and turned into a gale, causing Chu Mu and the others' clothes to flutter. In the blink of an eye, the 99-meter-long Destiny Dragon rushed past Chu Mu and the other 100 sword heroes and soared into the sky again. Chu Mu and the others only felt as if their bodies were being taken away by something. Immediately after, the Destiny Dragon that soared to the highest point suddenly blossomed with an incomparably resplendent golden light, turning into a dazzling sun. With a boom, it exploded and turned into 100 golden rays that shot down. Every golden ray was a small dragon. The 9-meter-long Destiny Dragons entered the bodies of Chu Mu and the other 100 sword heroes in the blink of an eye. They then rushed out of the bodies of the 100 sword heroes and coiled around their bodies. After 3 breaths, they entered their bodies. Chu Mu and the others all felt the feeling of hearing and seeing clearly as if all the dust had disappeared reappear. Everything around them became extremely clear. Even the fine dust in the air seemed to be clearly visible. Of course, this was also because they'd obtained such a huge boost from the energy of karmic luck. Compared to the karmic luck they possessed, this boost was at least a few tens of thousands of times greater. Moreover, this was merely the most obvious benefit of the energy of karmic luck. All the sword heroes looked enviously at Chu Mu and the others, receiving the boost of Destiny Force and a 9-meter-long Destiny Dragon at that. The effect was incomparably shocking. Although they couldn't possess it for a long time, at least in the final battle of the Destiny Force, they would receive the boost of the Destiny Dragon. Their strength would definitely increase by a lot in a short period of time. No matter what the final result was, in short, they were starting to reap the benefits now. Everyone returned for now. Elder Tang of the Eastern Sage Hall waved his sleeves and said loudly, "The 10 sword venerables and the 100 sword heroes all returned to their sword manors, because they all knew that the first segment of the Destiny Force had ended. Next, the second segment would begin. The true battle was about to begin. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 459. Elder Tang of the East Sage Palace hovered above the heaven-extinguishing sword arena and announced the rules of the battle for karmic luck. Other than killing people, he could do anything else, even if he had to cripple someone. How could one obtain benefits without paying a price? There was no such thing as a free meal in this world. Other than explaining the rules, Elder Tang also briefly explained the method of the battle between the 100 sword heroes. Each of the 100 sword heroes would be arranged for a battle, but it would not be repeated. In other words, after the battle between Sword Hero A and Sword Hero B, they would continue to fight. However, their opponents would not be each other but other people. Every sword hero would go through a battle. If they won, they would devour 10% of their opponent's karmic luck. If they lost, they would lose 10% of their own karmic luck. In the end, the sword heroes who won continuously would not only obtain the title of the strongest sword hero in the 10 great sword palaces, they would also be able to obtain 1% of the karmic luck of the other 99 sword heroes. In addition, the top 3 sword heroes in the battle for karmic luck would have a chance to enter the East Sage Hall and cultivate for half a year. Just thinking about it, cultivating in the East Sage Palace could increase one's foundation or strength by a lot. As the headquarters of the East Sage Palace, the foundation of the East Sage Palace would be even deeper. Cultivating there for half a year would definitely bring great benefits. If the final benefits of the battle for karmic luck belonged to the sword palaces, then the benefits of cultivating in the East Sage Palace for half a year would belong to the individual. Bailey Jiang swept his gaze across Chu Mu and the other sword heroes and said with a serious expression, "This time, you have to do your best to defeat the enemy and obtain more karmic luck to strengthen the Great Kuin Sword Palace, allowing the Sword Palace to gradually regain its glory." Palace Lord, rest assured, even if I have to risk my life, I will obtain more karmic luck to restore the Great Kuin Sword Palace to its former glory, Fu Yunxiao said with an incomparably serious expression. It was an answer to Bailey Jiang and also an encouragement to himself. The other sword heroes, including Chu Mu, all had a serious expression. They were the disciples of the Great Kuin Sword Palace. Aside from their own efforts and fortuitous encounters, it was also inseparable from the nurturing of the Great Kuin Sword Palace. If they had not entered the Great Kuin Sword Residence and received nurturing, they would not have been able to achieve such accomplishments at their age, even if they were extremely talented. They would not have been able to rapidly increase their strength and would not have been able to obtain certain opportunities. Moreover, after they became sword heroes and became the candidates for the Great Kuin Sword Mansion to participate in the Battle of Providence, they had an inseparable connection with the Great Kuin Sword Mansion. It could also be said that from then on, if the Great Kuin Sword Mansion prospered, they would also be slightly affected. If the Great Kuin Sword Mansion declined, they would similarly be slightly affected. Perhaps it wouldn't affect him much at first, but sometimes it would become quite obvious. On the other hand, if the providence of the 10 of them flourished, the Great Kuin Sword Manor would also be affected. However, the increase or decrease of individual providence was negligible to a massive entity like the Sword Manor. No matter what, they could only fight with their full strength now. The more opponents they defeated, the more energy of karmic luck they would obtain. Let alone the top 3. Just the temporary boost from the energy of karmic luck was enough to benefit them greatly. Not only did Chu Mu and the others think so, but the sword heroes of the other sword mansions also had the same thought. Furthermore, their gazes constantly swept towards the Great Kuin Sword Mansion as if they were looking at prey. In their eyes, the Great Kuin Sword Mansion that had been at the bottom for the past 60 years was the best prey. Whoever went up against the sword heroes of the Great Kuin Sword Mansion was equivalent to obtaining the energy of karmic luck for free. Many people were secretly praying in their hearts that they would be able to meet the sword heroes of the Great Kuin Sword Mansion. That would make things easier for them. I believe that all of you can't wait any longer. Since that's the case, I hereby announce that the decennial Battle of Providence of the 10 major sword mansions will now begin. Elder Tang of the East Sage Hall's voice spread out and reverberated throughout the entire heaven-battling sword grounds. It buzzed in everyone's ears and immediately caused them to be alert. They straightened their bodies and cleared their minds of distracting thoughts as they widened their eyes. The people of the 10 major sword mansions also looked towards the sky. Their eyes were glowing as they waited for Elder Tang's announcement. The first battle of the Battle of Providence. Elder Tang suddenly shouted with a serious expression. His eyes lit up as he looked down at the crowd, as if he could see through every single sword hero. Great Qian Sword Mansion's sky-incinerating sword hero, Lai Kongyang versus... Elder Tang paused and gave the crowd some time to think about who the Fengtian sword hero, Lai Kongyang, was. At the same time, it made them feel nervous. The Great Kuin Sword Mansion's Raging Flame sword hero, Long Lai. 2 sword heroes, please enter the arena. After Elder Tang's announcement, the crowd looked at each other. Among the 10 major sword mansions, the Great Kuin Sword Mansion was the weakest, and the Great Kuin Sword Mansion was the strongest. This was known to all. Wasn't it bullying the Great Kuin Sword Mansion by directly arranging the strongest sword mansion's sword hero against the weakest sword mansion? The Fengtian sword hero is actually the first to fight. Apart from the Great Kuin Sword Mansion, the other 9 sword mansions had grave expressions, especially those from the Great Kuin sword mansion. As the person involved, Long Lai's face was a little pale. Why? Because the Fengtian sword hero was extremely powerful. Previously, the book that Bailey Jianghe found had records of the Fengtian sword hero. The Fengtian sword hero, Lai Kongyang, had participated in the previous Battle of Providence and obtained the top 10. This wasn't surprising. It could only be said that his strength was not bad. Most importantly, he was already a powerful sword hero 10 years ago. After 10 years of accumulation, the current Lai Kongyang had become even more powerful. He was probably many times stronger than he was 10 years ago. It was very terrifying. Among the sword heroes, it was rare to hear of anyone who could accumulate for 10 years without breaking through. For example, the Great Kuin sword mansion's sword hero had only accumulated for 7 years before he couldn't suppress it anymore and was forced to break through. In a sense, the Fengtian sword hero, Lai Kongyang, had accumulated for at least 13 years since he became a sword hero. Even the Great Kuin sword hero, Mu Longqing, couldn't compare with such accumulation. It should be known that the longer a sword hero's accumulation, the more difficult it was. Once it reached the later stages, one had to continuously suppress and accumulate until the limit. Normally, a sword hero wouldn't be able to continue after 5 years and would have to break through. From 5 years onwards, the difficulty would double with each additional year. It was already very impressive if one could accumulate for 7 or 8 years. Those who could accumulate for 9 years were geniuses among the sword heroes. Sword heroes who could accumulate for 10 years were very rare. As for those who exceeded 10 years, there weren't more than 10 people in the Eastern sword domain in the past 1,000 years. The Fengtian sword hero, Lai Kongyang, had accumulated for 13 years. Even among the 10 people in the past 1,000 years, he could be ranked in the top 3. He had the title of the Great Qian Sword Mansion's sword hero and also the Great Qian Dynasty's sword hero. It was rumored that he had once left the Eastern sword domain and went to the Central sword domain to train for several years. After returning, his strength was even more terrifying and unfathomable. He was hailed as the Great Qian Dynasty's sword hero by the Emperor of the Eastern sword domain. The Eastern sword domain's sword hero, the king among the sword heroes. This was a supreme honor, even though many people didn't agree. And there were even some powerful sword heroes who challenged Lai Kongyang because they weren't convinced. In the end, they were defeated by Lai Kongyang's sword. It was rumored that Lai Kongyang didn't even use 50% of his strength. No matter what, the Fengtian sword hero Lai Kongyang was a legend. The Great Qian Sword Mansion's sword hero, the Great Qian Dynasty's sword hero, the Eastern sword domain's sword hero, the king among the sword heroes. Although no one knew how powerful Lai Kongyang's true strength was, the titles above his head were enough to make many people pale in fright. The raging inferno sword hero, Long Lai, couldn't believe that his first opponent would be the king among the sword heroes, the Fengtian sword hero, Lai Kongyang. He almost wanted to cry. It was a bad start. You can admit defeat, Bailey Jianghe said with a frown. He didn't expect that the first battle would be against the Great Kuin Sword Mansion's sword hero and the Eastern sword domain sword hero, Lai Kongyang. This was simply a blow to the confidence of the Great Kuin Sword Mansion's sword heroes. Just think about it. Encountering a terrifying opponent in the first battle and being defeated easily would be a huge blow to the overall morale. It might affect the final battle later on. If the Great Kuin Sword Mansion's sword hero could win the first battle, it would be a good start. It would also serve as a motivation for the sword heroes later on. At this moment, the people of the Great Kuin Sword Mansion even suspected that Elder Tang of the Eastern Sage Palace had deliberately arranged this to target the Great Kuin Sword Mansion. In theory, there was no need for him to do so. As an aloof sect, the Eastern Sage Palace shouldn't interfere with the 10 great sword mansions. Perhaps this was just a coincidence. After all, there was nothing special about Elder Tang's face. Junior Brother Long, the palace master, is right. Admit defeat to avoid being injured. It would be disadvantageous for the final battle later on. Fu Yunxiao said. Long Lai's face was pale. However, he had already decided to fight even if he wasn't as good as his opponent. He only reacted after hearing Fu Yunxiao's words. That's right. Against Lai Kongyang, there was only one outcome. Defeat. Once he was defeated by Lai Kongyang, he might be severely injured. It wasn't easy to recover from such injuries. Once he was arranged to fight later on, he would probably be defeated again. He might even be injured and continue to lose. If he was defeated all the way, no matter how strong his willpower was, he wouldn't be able to accept it. It would inevitably leave a psychological shadow and he wouldn't be able to improve for the rest of his life. After understanding this point, Long Lai suddenly heaved a sigh of relief. He looked at Elder Tang and said loudly, I admit defeat. What? He actually admitted defeat before even going on stage. This great Kuin Sword Mansion sword hero is too useless. So what? The great Kuin Sword Mansion sword hero is the weakest among the 10 great sword mansions. Moreover, his opponent this time is the sword hero king Lai Kongyang. If he doesn't admit defeat, is he going to embarrass himself? Although that's the case, this is too, at this moment, from one of the 10 great Kuin Sword Mansion's sword heroes, a 9'9" long providence, Dragon Rose. It rapidly rushed into Long Lai's body and rushed back out. Its length instantly broke through to a little more than 3 meters. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chijian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 460. There was a seal in the heaven-deciding sword arena. This seal was to isolate the center of the arena and prevent the aftermath of the battle from affecting or harming the spectators. However, the seal was unable to isolate sound. Moreover, although the seats of the 10 great sword manners were relatively close to the sword battle arena in the middle, they were still considered an extension of the spectator seats. However, the name of the seats was different. They were called the contestant seats. The first battle was between the Great Qian Sword Mansion's Inferno Sword Hero and the Great Kuin Sword Mansion's Inferno Sword Hero. Before the battle even began, the Inferno Sword Hero had already admitted defeat. This caused a commotion among the millions of spectators. The contents of the discussions were mostly bad for the Great Kuin Sword Mansion. Burning Sky Sword Hero, Raging Inferno Sword Hero. These 2 titles are enough to let people know who is better. What's the point of competing? This voice entered the ears of everyone in the Great Kuin Sword Mansion without any concealment. Long Lai's expression immediately changed. He raised his head and looked towards the source of the voice. His eyes flickered as he tried to find the person who had spoken. Unfortunately, there were millions of viewers. There were too many people. Even if they knew the direction, they couldn't determine who it was. In my opinion, the Great Kuin Sword Mansion's sword heroes do not live up to their reputation. After Long Lai retracted his gaze, another voice sounded. This time around, the entire Great Kuin Sword Mansion was involved. However, they were helpless. Could it be that they had to kill everyone here? Putting aside the fact that he didn't have the strength to do so, with so many people around him, even if he were to just stand there and let him kill them, who knew how long it would take? Don't be affected by the outside world. Bailey Jiang, he shouted coldly. Use your strength to prove it and make them shut their mouths. Qin Bo, who rarely spoke as well. His tone was calm and contained a trace of seriousness. Yes. Other than Chu Mu, the other 9 sword heroes all solemnly responded. Only Chu Mu, from the beginning, had an indifferent expression. His attitude of not changing even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him made Bailey Jiang, he, and the others think highly of him. The second battle of the Battle of Providence. Wind Sword Hero Tang Yuan of Gale Sword Mansion versus Jade Wave Sword Hero Yang, Zhevian Sword Mansion. Elder Tang announced. 2 figures flew out from 2 different camps of the Sword Mansion. They passed through the seal and landed on the arena. The seal would only be effective when it was attacked by a sufficiently powerful force. Let the battle begin. Elder Tang shouted from the sky. The sweeping wind sword hero and the blue wave sword hero both drew their swords and engaged in an intense battle. The sweeping wind sword hero was proficient in the wind element, while the blue wave sword hero was proficient in the water element. The clash of green and blue was very exciting. The millions of spectators watched with their eyes wide open and held their breaths. They couldn't wait to imprint the battle between these two sword heroes in their minds so that they could savor it all the time. Chu Mu and the others were also watching the battle between the two sword masters on the arena with wide eyes, especially Chu Mu. As he watched, he put himself in the shoes of the two sword masters, quickly switching between opponents, how to deal with the opponent's moves, how to counterattack, and so on. Among those present, only Chu Mu could do this. That was because his spiritual strength was incomparably powerful, 10 times stronger than others. That was why he could multitask, especially with the support of the power of destiny. The effect was even more obvious. The benefits were obvious. Chu Mu could convert everything he watched into his own in an extremely short amount of time. In other words, Chu Mu could quickly convert everything he saw into his own ability while watching, slowly strengthening himself. This ability was undoubtedly very terrifying. Even the sword of Gojosian would be jealous. Although the others were also watching attentively, they didn't gain much. They could only temporarily remember a small portion of what they felt was useful. When they had time, they could slowly reflect on it and convert it. The techniques of the sword, the application of the sword force, the adaptability, the timing of the sword skills, and so on. Swordsmen who could become sword masters were all people with outstanding talent. This didn't only refer to talent in cultivation or swordsmanship. It also included talent in battle and other aspects. Not a single one could be lacking. No matter how weak a sword hero was, he still had his merits. In the blink of an eye, the two sword masters on the battle arena had been fighting for 15 minutes. There was still no winner. The sword chi they slashed out was incomparably pure and condensed. When it collided with the seal, it instantly shattered and turned into countless specks of light. However, the seal only trembled slightly. There were only extremely fine ripples that disappeared in less than a breath's time. Junior Chu, who do you think will win? Jiang Leiken suddenly asked in a low voice. Blue Wave Sword Master. After 3 breaths, Chu Mu answered. Why? The others all looked over, including Chen Buer. Intuition, Chu Mu answered. Ah. For a moment, everyone didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Just then, the Wind Sword Master was hit by the Blue Wave Sword Master's sword skill. He flew backwards and hit the seal. With a groan, blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He was already injured. You win, the Wind Sword Master said with a dark expression. He still had the strength to fight, but because he was injured, he could only use 80% of his strength. There was no way he could defeat his opponent. He might as well heal himself and wait for the next battle. Blue Peach Sword Master, Yang Zhe wins, Elder Tang announced. The Blue Wave Sword Master heaved a sigh of relief. This battle wasn't easy. A 9 feet 9 fate dragon flew out from his body and rushed towards the Wind Sword Master. When it returned, it was already more than 10 feet long. The Wind Sword Master didn't move and allowed 10% of his fate power to be devoured. He knew that he couldn't avoid it no matter what. He could only wait for the next battle to replenish it. As long as I meet the people from the Great Kuin Sword Mansion, I can definitely replenish it or even become stronger, the Wind Sword Master thought. His gloomy eyes swept across the 10 sword masters from the Great Kuin Sword Mansion as if he was looking at prey. This gaze made the sword masters from the Great Kuin Sword Mansion very unhappy. The third battle of the Battle of Providence. The Phantom Sword Master from the Great Minister Sword Mansion, Yun Su, versus the Violent Thunder Sword Mansion, Shen Tushing. Elder Tang's voice sounded again. Another 2 figures leaped up. One left after images while the other was surrounded by violent lightning. They both passed through the seal and landed on the battle arena, facing each other from afar. The two of them mocked each other. The battle begins. With Elder Tang's shout, the battle began. At this level of battle, there was almost no probing. Or rather, their initial attacks were just probing. However, to the others, such probing was no different from a killing move. Chu Mu once again put himself in the shoes of the Phantom Swordmaster. He imagined himself as the opponent of the Phantom Swordmaster. After a while, he became the opponent of the Violent Thunder Swordmaster. After that, he became the opponent of the two of them, fighting one against two. This kind of fantasy was almost realistic. Even with Chu Mu's powerful soul spirit, he had to be fully focused. Moreover, the consumption was not small. Therefore, after every battle, Chu Mu would seize the time to recover. In the end, the Phantom Swordmaster injured the Violent Thunder Swordmaster and won. The Phantom Swordmaster's Fate Dragon increased by a little more than 10 feet. The fourth battle of the Battle of Providence was between the Black Eagle Sword Mansion and the Hidden Dragon Sword Mansion. The fifth battle was between the Bright Moon Sword Mansion and the Great Sun Sword Mansion. With this, the first round of the Battle of Providence was completed. Elder Tang announced that there would be a 15-minute break. During this 15-minute break, Chu Mu closed his eyes to rest. In fact, he was meditating with all his might, using this method to recover the mental energy that he had expended. The other sword heroes were also pondering over the 5 battles, trying their best to convert and absorb. 15 minutes was actually very short. However, it was enough for the audience to wake up from the 5 consecutive exciting battles. They adjusted their mentality and welcomed the next exciting battles. Next, we will begin the second round of the Battle of Providence. Elder Tang was still floating in midair. To a sword artist with his cultivation, it was nothing much to stay in the air for a long period of time. The sixth battle. Great Qian Sword Mansion's Aurora Sword Hero, Feng Wuji against. Elder Tang announced. His gaze once again landed on the Great Kuin Sword Mansion side. Instantly, the hearts of the Great Kuin Sword Mansion's people thumped. They had a bad feeling. Great Kuin Sword Mansion's Miaoing Sword Hero, Yu Miao Miao. How can this be? Bailey Jiang, his countenance changed. To be honest, although the people from the Great Qian Sword Mansion were arrogant, their 10 sword heroes were all very strong. In terms of accumulation, even the weakest of them had at least 5 years of experience. On the other hand, the Great Kuin Sword Mansion's side had only accumulated for slightly more than 5 years, less than 6 years. Even if the Great Kuin Sword Mansion's sword hero with the deepest accumulation were to face off against the Great Qian Sword Mansion's sword hero with the weakest accumulation, it was still unknown whether the Great Kuin Sword Mansion's sword hero could emerge victorious. Even if the Great Kuin Sword Mansion's sword hero could emerge victorious, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. Of course, age was not the only criterion to judge one's accumulation. However, it was the most commonly used criterion. According to the book, the Aurora Sword Hero, Feng Wuji, had accumulated for 6 years, while Yu Miao Miao had only accumulated for 4 years. The possibility of her being defeated was very high. I won't be defeated so easily. Yu Miao Miao stood up, her beautiful eyes gleaming with incomparable determination. To think that you're not admitting defeat. This is really beyond my expectations. On the arena, Feng Wuji smiled lightly, appearing frivolous. It's still not clear who will win or lose, Yu Miao Miao said expressionlessly. She understood that the other party was intentionally provoking her to disturb her mental state. That was why she would not be affected so easily. Since that is the case, then I'll have some fun. Feng Wuji continued to smile frivolously. Feng Wuji comprehended the state of light, and his speed was unparalleled. Yu Miao Miao comprehended the state of sound. These 2 states were about the same level, each having their own specialties. A beam of white light flashed on the arena. It was Feng Wuji. He was too fast, so Yu Miao Miao could not catch him. Her counterattack was limited. In the end, Yu Miao Miao was defeated. Blood leaked out from the corner of her lips. She had no choice but to admit defeat. 10% of her luck was devoured. First, it was Long Lai who admitted defeat. Then, Yu Miao Miao was easily defeated. To the great Kuin sword mansion, this was a great blow. This was especially so for the discussions in the spectator stands, which made them feel exceptionally frustrated. The battles continued. After the second round ended, the third round started after 15 minutes of rest. Elder Tang still arranged for the Great Qian Sword Mansion to fight against the Great Kuin Sword Mansion. Without a doubt, the Great Kuin Sword Mansion lost again. The sword hero that went up was even more injured. In the fourth and fifth rounds, the other sword manners won and lost. Furthermore, they changed their opponents. Only the Great Kuin Sword Mansion kept fighting against the Great Qian Sword Mansion, losing 5 rounds in a row. Anyone could tell that there was something fishy going on. It seemed like the Eastern Sage Hall's Elder Tang did this intentionally. Losing 5 rounds in a row was a great blow. Furthermore, the discussions in the spectator stands made the blow even greater. In any case, the current situation was very unfavorable for the Great Kuin Sword Mansion. Their morale was very low. The 6th round started. The Great Qian Sword Mansion's strong wind sword hero, Yao Xiang versus the Great Kuin Sword Mansion's Zhen Tian sword hero, Chu Mu. Chu Mu, this match is up to you. Bailey Jiang, his face was a bit hazy as he solemnly instructed. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qijian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 461. This match was the one that the Great Kuin Sword Mansion had the highest chance of winning. Chu Mu was the strongest among the 10 sword heroes of the Great Kuin Sword Mansion. Years of experience didn't apply to him. The Gale sword hero was the one with the least years of experience among the 10 sword heroes of the Great Kuin Sword Mansion. According to the records, there wasn't anything special about him. The strongest sword hero of the Great Kuin Sword Mansion against the weakest sword hero of the Great Kuin Sword Mansion. This was the best opportunity to counterattack. Only by winning this match could they temporarily reverse the situation and stimulate the low morale of the crowd. Don't hold back. Winning beautifully is the most important thing. Chun Bu-er's voice sounded. Indeed, if Chu Mu won after a tough battle, the effect on the morale of the crowd wouldn't be obvious. If he won cleanly and beautifully, the effect would be very obvious. Hearing Chen Bu-er's words, the gloomy eyes of the other 9 sword heroes lit up. They looked at Chu Mu with hope. Although they didn't say anything, Chu Mu could see the anticipation and hope in their eyes. Nodding his head, Chu Mu didn't say anything. He wanted to use practical actions to reverse the low morale of the crowd. With a leap, he leaped into the air like a goshawk. Chu Mu felt as though he had passed through something and landed on the arena. Immediately after, there was a flash before his eyes and a gust of wind blew. Yao Xiang's figure appeared 100 meters away. He was staring at Chu Mu with a cold smile. Everyone from the Great Kuin Sword Mansion clenched their fists. They were very nervous. Even Chen Bu-er was the same. It was just that one couldn't tell from their appearance. This damned Elder Tang. Bailey Jianghe cursed in his heart. The 6 matches in a row were between the Great Kuin Sword Mansion and the Great Qian Sword Mansion. It was hard not to think about such an arrangement. It seemed as though they were deliberately targeting the Great Kuin Sword Mansion. Let the battle begin, Elder Tang announced. Looking at the 2 people below, he already had a conclusion in his heart. In his opinion, this so-called Zhen Tian sword hero would definitely lose, and it would be a very ugly loss. After all, there was a clear difference between 3 years of accumulation and 5 years of accumulation, especially the 3 years between 2 to 5 years of accumulation after every sword artist became a sword hero. It was the period of time where one's strength would grow the fastest. Back then, You defeated my younger brother, Yao Yi. Now it's my turn to defeat you." Yao Xiang pointed his cyan sword at Chu Mu, a cool breeze swirling around him. Chu Mu suddenly realized that this person was Yao Yi's elder brother. So what? He was just an opponent that he had to defeat. Arrogant. I'll beat you until you can't be arrogant anymore. I'll shatter that little bit of pride of yours. Yao Xiang's voice was like a cold wind blowing. I'm glad that you have such thoughts. Originally, I wanted to exchange a few more moves with you. Unfortunately, in order to reinvigorate my senior brothers, I can only defeat you with a single strike. Compared to Yao Xiang's overbearing attitude, Chu Mu appeared to be very calm. Defeat me with a single strike. Yao Xiang's mouth instantly opened wide and his eyes widened. His face was filled with disbelief, as though he was hearing things. Soon after, he laughed instead of getting angry. Ha! Defeat me with a single strike. This is the funniest thing I've ever heard since I was born. It's probably the funniest thing I've ever heard in my life. His loud laughter spread through the seal and landed in the ears of every sword artist. Immediately, the million spectators were stunned. Then, as though they had heard the funniest joke in the world, they couldn't help but laugh out loud. The information of the 100 sword heroes was compiled into a book. Almost everyone in the million spectators had a book. Of course, they only knew that Chu Mu had become a sword hero 3 years ago. They didn't know that Chu Mu's strength was the best among the 10 great sword heroes of the Great Kuin Sword Mansion. Such a secret had long been forbidden by the Sword Mansion. For the sake of the Sword Mansion's glory, the Sword Mansion students pretended that they didn't know about this matter. Therefore, Chu Mu was now treated as an arrogant and ignorant person. The other 9 Sword Mansion's swordsmen were stunned before they laughed. They all felt that this disciple of the Great Kuin Sword Mansion was too arrogant and ignorant. The Great Kuin Sword Mansion has really declined. Elder Tang, who was in the sky, shook his head and sighed softly. Only he could hear it. Since that's the case, why did you ask me to make such arrangements? The eyes of the people from the Great Kuin Sword Mansion, especially Bailey Jiang, he and the 9 sword heroes, lit up. After a year of interaction, they knew that Chu Mu wasn't an arrogant and frivolous person. Could it be that Chu Mu can really defeat his opponent with a single strike? This thought popped up in their minds at the same time, and they couldn't suppress their excitement. If Chu Mu could really defeat his opponent with a single strike, it would definitely be a great motivation for the Great Kuin Sword Mansion. Their low morale would instantly soar. Yao Xiang's laughter suddenly stopped. He turned into a gust of wind and charged at Chu Mu. His eyes, which were flickering with a green glow, left 2 green tails in the air because his body moved so quickly. Watch how I defeat you with 3 strikes. Yao Xiang shouted as he charged over and thrust out his sword. Whoosh! 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 As Yao Xiang's wrist shook, 30% of the spiritual qi in the air quickly gathered. The green supreme grade sword swept out with extremely condensed wind blades. The edges were as sharp as the edge of a supreme grade sword. Hundreds of densely packed wind blades shot at Chu Mu like a swarm of locusts. Sword hero sword technique. Tempest 100-blade strike. Once struck, the protective sword qi would be easily torn apart. Even superior grade armor wouldn't be able to block it and would immediately be severely injured. Furthermore, the Tempest 100-blade strike was extremely fast and difficult to dodge. In the blink of an eye, it crossed dozens of meters and arrived 10 meters away from Chu Mu. Everyone stared with their eyes wide open. The people of the Great Kuin Sword Mansion wanted to see how Chu Mu would counterattack, while the others wanted to see how miserable Chu Mu would be after being struck. They felt that Chu Mu was just boasting, so once Chu Mu was struck and defeated, they would feel good in their hearts. The monster-slaying sword was unsheathed and slashed from top to bottom. 40% of the spiritual qi in the air quickly gathered. The Tianhuang sword qi poured into the monster-slaying sword and the tearing concept spread out. A dark gold color covered the monster-slaying sword. The sword's aura was extremely powerful, and the rock-shaking energy was activated. Every action was completed in an instant. Everyone only saw Chu Mu slash out. Most people didn't even see how he pulled out the sword. They only saw a dark gold crescent moon that was more than 10 meters long cut through the sky. A dense buzzing sound that was so faint that it was almost inaudible sounded. The incomparably resplendent, dark, golden, waning moon flew forward as if it was cutting through the sky. Wherever it passed, a vacuum was formed. A faint, golden flame, tail, dragged behind it, like the tail of a meteor. Everyone's eyes were attracted by this sword. They were like iron shavings attracted by a magnet. They couldn't move or blink, and even their minds seemed to be attracted. It was impossible to describe the brilliance that erupted from this sword. There were no words to describe the beauty of this sword. It was as if a god had slashed down, destroying everything in its path. Hundreds of extremely sharp wind blades collapsed in the blink of an eye, turning into a gust of green wind that followed behind the dark golden crescent moon like guards. Sword hero sword skill, rock-shaking sword wave. The people of the great Kuin sword mansion were all excited. Impossible. Yao Xiang's expression changed drastically. He felt his vision darken as if night had fallen. Immediately after, the dark gold crescent moon tore through the darkness and slashed at him. He couldn't dodge in time. He could only mobilize 30% of the spiritual chi of heaven and earth to form a defense and hold his sword in front of his chest. The dark gold crescent moon instantly tore through 30% of the spiritual chi of heaven and earth and heavily bombarded Yao Xiang's sword. The powerful force directly tore through Yao Xiang's protective sword chi. The terrifying rock-shaking force made Yao Xiang unable to hold onto his sword and flew to the side. His palm was twisted and injured. Pum! The robe on Yao Xiang's body exploded as the upper rank armor released a burst of intense light, which dissipated under the dark, golden, waning moon. A cracking sound was heard as the upper rank armor shattered. Yao Xiang's entire body flew out like a cannonball, heavily crashing into the seal. The huge rebound force bounced his body back, his head swinging forward as his mouth involuntarily opened wide. A mouthful of blood spurted out like an arrow. With another bang, Yao Xiang's entire body was sprawled on the ground of the arena. His head was bleeding and the arena shook. At the same time, everyone's heart trembled. They felt as if they had been smashed by a hammer, and they almost suffocated. The entire heaven-battling arena fell into a strange, dead silence. Even breathing seemed to have stopped. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths. A dragon of providence flew out from Chu Mu's body and rushed into Yao Xiang's body. It was more than 3 meters long. After 30 breaths, Yao Xiang, who woke up from his coma, struggled with difficulty and let out a groan. Quickly bring him down. The great Qian, Sword Mansion's mansion master, was the first to react. He quickly shouted. Immediately, an elder rushed out and landed on the arena. He carried Yao Xiang and grabbed at the void. Yao Xiang's supreme grade sword fell into his hand. The elder glared at Chu Mu fiercely and snorted. His voice was like a sword radiance that pierced into Chu Mu's ears. Chu Mu frowned slightly. This snort had shaken his mind, his spiritual world, and his chi and blood. Fortunately, his soul power was very strong. It was only shaken, and he returned to normal after a few breaths. A murderous intent flashed in his eyes. He wanted to kill this origin realm elder of the great Qian Sword Mansion. In a flash, the elder of the great Qian Sword Mansion brought Yao Xiang and his sword away from the arena and returned to the great Qian Sword Mansion's camp. He quickly gave Yao Xiang elixirs to heal his internal and external injuries. One had to admit that Yao Xiang looked very miserable at this moment. Although he had woken up, he was powerless and was at the mercy of others. Heaven-shaking sword hero Chu Mu wins. Elder Tang recovered from his shock and loudly announced. He only felt that his mind was a bit absent-minded. The scene in front of him had overturned the conclusion in his heart, and he found it hard to accept. He won. Bailey Jiang murmured. He won. He won. Chumu really won. He defeated him with one sword. He really defeated him with one sword. Ha ha ha. We can hold our heads high. We can hold our heads high. At this moment, the 9 sword heroes were cheering like children. They had been too depressed before. The people of the great Kuan sword mansion were overjoyed and extremely excited. Their hearts were beating several times faster, and their faces were flushed. Even Chun Bu, Er's hands were trembling from the excitement in his heart. What a soul-stirring sword! It's not impossible to fight against Huangfu Huangtian in 10 years, he said softly in his heart. He couldn't help but feel a surge of battle intent. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 462. The first day of the Battle of Providence had ended, but the discussions were unprecedentedly heated because of Chumu's battle and Chumu's sword. Thrilling, stunning beyond compare. Not only did the millions of spectators not dare to underestimate Chumu, but the other members of the 9 Supreme Sword Residences didn't dare to underestimate Chumu either. They knew that it wasn't luck at all. It was true strength. Kong Yang, what do you think of that sword? The palace master of the Great Qian Sword Residence asked. Not bad. That's all. Lai Kongyang said faintly. That's true. The Great Qian Sword Residence's King Residence Palace master smiled and secretly thought that he had asked the wrong person. Lai Kongyang was the Sword Hero King of Eastern Sword Region. That Great Kuan Sword Residence's Chumu's strength was not bad, but compared to Lai Kongyang, the difference was like heaven and earth. He believed that Lai Kongyang had used his full strength to defeat Yao Xiang. As for the unlucky Yao Xiang, he was severely injured by Chumu's sword and had vomited blood and fainted. He was brought back and treated with elixirs. Unfortunately, Chumu's sword was driven by the infinite desolation, sword Qi. The corrosive characteristics of the infinite desolation, sword Qi, constantly corroded Yao Xiang's body. It would take a lot of time to get rid of the corrosive characteristics of the infinite desolation, sword Qi. Simply put, Yao Xiang would be crippled in a short period of time. Even if he went on stage, he wouldn't be able to use 50% of his strength. Elder Tang, please arrange for you to fight with Chumu for tomorrow's battle. The mansion master of the great Qian dynasty's sword mansion said with a smile, You know what to do. Lai Kongyang smiled and said, Don't worry. I guarantee that he will suffer 10 times more than junior brother Yao for what he did to junior brother Yao. The great Kuan sword residence is really unexpected this time to have such a powerful sword hero. The palace master of the Hidden Dragon Sword Residence, which was ranked second among the 10 supreme sword residences, smiled and looked at a young man beside him. Lu Yuan, what do you think of his sword? It's just Essa. Lu Yuan replied expressionlessly. I only have one opponent. I don't care about the others. He, the Hidden Dragon Sword Mansion's mansion master, smiled. He knew that the opponent Lu Yuan was talking about was the Sword Hero King, Lai Kongyang. After the first day's battle ended, the Great Kuan Sword Residence returned to the Great Kuan Garden with a record of 1 win and 9 losses. The Battle of Providence was not something that could be completed in a day or two. Even though they had lost 9 rounds, Chumu's victory made them feel especially proud and refreshed. Junior brother Chu's sword is really too amazing. Long Lai laughed loudly. I think they might think that this is junior brother Chu's full strength, Jiang Liken said with a smile. Junior brother Chu, let's shock them again in tomorrow's battle. Let them see your prowess. Fu Yinxiao also laughed. Because Chu Mu's rise was too sudden, it overturned the conclusion in everyone's heart. making them feel unprepared. Senior brothers, don't be too optimistic. Yu Miao Miao's face flashed with a hint of worry. With one look, I can tell that Elder Tang of the East Sage Hall is helping the great Kuin Sword Mansion to go against us. Otherwise, we wouldn't have lost 9 rounds. If not for Junior Brother Chu's strength, I'm afraid that we would have lost 10 rounds in a row today and wouldn't have the face to continue participating in the next battle. When everyone heard Yu Miao Miao's words, they were stunned and their faces turned gloomy. It was too obvious. The other sword manners had adjusted their opponents, but the great Kuin Sword Mansion's opponent had always been the great Kuin Sword Mansion. Even a fool could tell that there was something fishy going on. However, the East Sage Hall was high and mighty. The status of the East Sage Hall's elders was not inferior to the mansion masters of the 10 sword manors. Their strength was even more unfathomable. Regardless of status or strength, they couldn't question an elder of the East Sage Hall. If that's the case, tomorrow's battle... Everyone's faces suddenly turned pale. Their eyes were filled with worry as they looked at Chumu. Suddenly, they hated the feeling of exhilaration that they had just experienced. This was because they had all thought of the same situation. In tomorrow's battle, there was an 80 to 90% chance that the great Kuin Sword Mansion's Blazing Sky Sword Hero, Lai Kongyang, would be pitted against Chumu. The Blazing Sky Sword Hero Lai Kongyang. Even without that book, this name was still very well known. He was the #1 sword hero in the Eastern Sword Domain, the king of sword heroes. They didn't know how powerful Lai Kongyang was. They only knew that until now, those powerful sword heroes who didn't accept the title of king of sword heroes couldn't even take 3 of his sword strikes. It was rumored that no one had ever seen Lai Kongyang unleash his full strength because they weren't qualified. The words Blazing Sky Sword Hero, Lai Kongyang, were like a piece of heaven that suppressed all the sword heroes in the Eastern Sword Domain. They could only look up at him and feel despair under such suppression. Even if there was a day when Lai Kongyang couldn't suppress his accumulation and had to break through, such a shadow would still follow them. Was Chumu powerful? Powerful, at least among the students of the great Kuin Sword Mansion. Chumu was the most powerful. Furthermore, he was only 23 years old this year. He became a sword hero at the age of 20 and was the only one in the great Kuin dynasty in 1,000 years. Even in the entire Eastern Sword Domain, he could be ranked in the top 10. At the age of 22, he could suppress a sword hero who had accumulated for 5 years. Now, at the age of 23, he could execute a soul-stirring sword strike and severely injure a sword hero who had accumulated for almost 6 years. They all believed that if Chumu was given enough time, as long as Chumu was given a few more years, he might be able to compete with Lai Kongyang for the title of King of Sword Heroes in the Eastern Sword Domain. However, if Chumu were to face off against Lai Kongyang tomorrow, Lai Kongyang's incomparably powerful strength would cause others to feel despair. Once Chumu was defeated by Lai Kongyang's sword, it might be a huge blow to Chumu. It would leave a shadow in his heart and hinder Chumu's progress in the future. To a certain extent, it was equivalent to stifling him. Junior Brother Chu, I know that you are proud and unyielding, but in tomorrow's battle, once you face off against Lai Kongyang, you must immediately admit defeat no matter what. Do not give Lai Kongyang a chance to attack. Jiang Laikan said to Chumu with an extremely serious expression. The other sword heroes also had solemn expressions. That's right, Junior Brother Chu. With your talent, you might not necessarily be inferior to Lai Kongyang in the future. What you lack is time. If you had become a sword hero 10 years ago, you might not necessarily be unable to fight Lai Kongyang now. Fu Yunxiao added, however, you have only been a sword hero for 3 years now. This is the time when a sword hero's strength will increase by leaps and bounds. Senior brothers, don't worry. I know what I am doing, Chumu smiled and said. Compared to the worries in their hearts, Chumu was actually very calm. Firstly, Chumu didn't know much about Lai Kongyang. He had only been a sword hero for a short period of time. What kind of person Lai Kongyang was, he only knew about it yesterday. Secondly, it was because of his confidence. The 2 years of seclusion in the Eastern Sage Sub-Palace was mainly to strengthen his foundation, but it also had an obvious effect on his strength. After a year of digesting and absorbing, Chu Mu's strength was still increasing rapidly. Until now, it had only slowed down slightly. All of this was because of his powerful soul and monstrous perception that surpassed other sword artists. The increase was greater than others, and the duration was longer than others. This was his incomparable advantage. A sword hero's strength was determined by their years of accumulation. In fact, Chu Mu's 1 year of accumulation might be equivalent to several years of accumulation for other sword heroes. Therefore, even Chu Mu himself wasn't clear about how strong he was, because until now he had yet to meet an opponent who could make him use his full strength. This was because Chu Mu still couldn't fight against an Origin Realm sword artist, even if he used his full strength. Therefore, they couldn't be called opponents. Only sword heroes could be called opponents. After looking at the information of the 100 sword heroes in the book, Chu Mu had a feeling that of these sword heroes, if there were no accidents, only Lai Kongyang could be his opponent. As for the 2 sword heroes who were ranked 2nd and 3rd, if they could force Chu Mu to use his full strength, even Chu Mu himself couldn't be sure. Just the information in the book was quite detailed, but there were some secret things that weren't recorded at all. Perhaps they didn't know, or perhaps they didn't allow it. If Chu Mu was hiding something, then the others might be hiding something as well. Originally, Chu Mu's plan was to compete with Lai Kongyang in the final battle, the battle at the pinnacle. But if tomorrow's battle was really arranged to be between him and Lai Kongyang, then it wasn't impossible. They would have to fight sooner or later. Junior brother. Fu Yunxiao was anxious and immediately said, as if he wanted Chu Mu to agree right now. All right, since junior brother Chu said that he knows what he's doing, then he knows what he's doing. Jiang Liken suppressed Fu Yunxiao's words and said softly, we should believe in junior brother Chu. Everyone also came to their senses and secretly thought that they were too worried. Chu Mu wasn't someone who would act recklessly. Senior brothers, take advantage of the great fortune to comprehend and do your best to increase your strength. Chu Mu said with a smile and stood up to leave. Junior brother is right. Now is the best opportunity for us to raise our strength. Work hard and comprehend. No matter what, we cannot lose again. Long Lai stretched out his hand and clenched his fist tightly as he spoke in a powerful and resonating voice. In the blink of an eye, everyone left. They all returned to their rooms to reflect on what they had learned today, converting and absorbing it. Chu Mu was different. He had a strong soul and monstrous comprehension ability. Furthermore, he had the support of a vast amount of luck. Chu Mu had converted and absorbed all 50 battles that happened today, drawing inferences from them. In terms of who gained the most from watching such battles, Chu Mu was undoubtedly the first. Even Lai Kongyang couldn't compare to him. Hence, Chu Mu was now using the luck to comprehend the sword intent. One could say that the sword intent was one of Chu Mu's trump cards. He didn't know when he would have to reveal this trump card. Of course, the slower, the better. At the same time, Bailey Jiang, he left the great Kuan garden with a heavy heart. For the sake of tomorrow's battle, the great Kuan sword residents wouldn't repeat today's mistakes. He had to make an appearance, even if he had to pay a price. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 463. The night passed silently as Chu Mu and the others spent their time comprehending. Such a huge blessing might only happen once in a lifetime, and it wouldn't last long either. They had to make full use of every minute and second. Dawn arrived. When the first ray of sunlight shone down from the sky, millions of spectators returned to the heavenly deciding sword arena. The 50 battles yesterday were all very exciting, but the most exciting one was Chu Mu's battle. This was the common understanding of the spectators because that sword had overturned the conclusion in their hearts. Their hearts were yearning to see that sword again. It was soul-stirring and peerless. The people of the 10 great sword palaces had also arrived at the competition area, but the battle had yet to start because Elder Tang, the host of the battle, had yet to appear. This situation made everyone feel strange. The great Qian sword palace's lord had a trace of astonishment in his eyes, while Bailey Jiang had a trace of a smile in his eyes. All of this seemed to have nothing to do with Chu Mu. He closed his eyes to rest, but in fact he was in the midst of comprehending. Sword intent realm. Under the blessing of the powerful blessing, he could feel his improvement at all times. Time passed by slowly. After an hour, a figure flew over and appeared above the arena. He was wearing a black robe and had a solemn expression. It was actually not Elder Tang from yesterday. Elder Tang has some urgent matters to attend to. I'll be presiding over the upcoming battle for karmic luck. You can call me Elder Long, the black-robed old man said emotionlessly. His voice was stiff and somewhat unreasonable. The great Qian Sword Palace's palace lord was startled, while Bailey Jiang had a look of relief. What's going on? Why did they change the referee midway? A swordsman was puzzled and muttered softly. In my opinion, that Elder Tang from yesterday was on the side of the great Qian Sword Palace. He had the intention to help the great Qian Sword Palace go against the great Kuin Sword Palace. Therefore, he was banned from continuing to host the battle. A shrewd swordsman guessed. Didn't they say that the East Sage Hall was detached from worldly affairs and wouldn't get involved in the disputes of the Eastern Sword Domain? Someone was puzzled. It's true that the Eastern Sage Hall is a transcendent being, but not everyone from the Eastern Sage Hall is able to do so. This short conversation had explained most of the true situation. They've changed the referee. That's great. This way, Chu Mu might not have to face Lai Kongyang. The great Kuin Sword Mansion's sword heroes were the happiest. Elder Long didn't care about the discussions of the surrounding people. A book appeared in his hand, and he flipped open the book to take a look. After that, he swept his gaze towards the 10 great sword mansions. The first battle. Hidden Dragon Sword Mansion's Good Water Sword Hero, Li Ruoshui, versus Bright Moon Sword Mansion's Starry Sword Hero, Li Xinghan. Let the battle begin. The two sword masters immediately engaged in an intense battle. Virtuous as water, the sky full of stars. 15 minutes later, Li Ruoshui had defeated the astral swordsman in one move, and his fate dragon had increased by quite a bit. The battles continued one after another. No one could guess which sword mansion's sword grandmaster would fight against which sword mansion's sword grandmaster in the next battle. It was obvious that the 100 sword grandmasters from the 10 great sword mansions had been disrupted and rearranged. The battles continued one after another. There were even battles between the same sword mansions' sword grandmasters. The 8th battle, Great Wind Sword Mansions, Flashing Wind Sword Mansions, Tang Yuan versus Great Kuin Sword Mansions, Zhen Tian Sword Mansions, Chu Mu. It's Zhen Tian Sword Mansion's turn. I wonder if he'll be able to unleash that stunning sword strike like last time. That's great. Junior brother, Chu, doesn't have to face Lai Kongyang. Chu Mu and Tang Yuan both leaped onto the battle arena, attracting the attention of the crowd. Your sword move yesterday was very spectacular. However, I will defeat you, Tang Yuan said. Please. Chu Mu was even simpler. The battle began. Tang Yuan's comprehension of the wind mentality had already reached perfection. The moment he drew his sword, he displayed a powerful sword skill. Under the long sword, a green wind gathered. A whistling sound resounded in the surroundings. Tang Yuan's figure disappeared, transforming into a green wind that flew towards Chu Mu. Flashing Wind Sword Mansion's ultimate skill, wind transformation. Many powerful enemies had died under his ultimate sword skill. Now he displayed it immediately because he valued Chu Mu. Yesterday, Chu Mu's sword move had shocked him. "All right," Chu Mu said softly. He unsheathed the monster slaying sword, raised it, and slashed down again. The whole process took less than 1/100th of a second. The 10-meter dark golden waning moon appeared again. The heaven and earth seemed to have lost its color. Only the dark golden waning moon released an incomparably bright light. Almost everyone's eyes widened. Only Ao Xingyun, Lu Yuan, and Lai Kongyang's expressions did not change. Tang Yuan's heart shook. He felt that the air in front of him was affected by some strange power. It started to vibrate, affecting his sword skill. Wind transformation was a wind attribute sword skill. It was closely related to the airflow. If the airflow was affected, his sword skill would be affected as well. His vision darkened. A dark, golden, waning moon pierced through the air and filled his eyes. It completely occupied his world, making it impossible to dodge. Tang Yuan finally understood how Yao Xiang felt. With a boom, his sword skill was broken. His protective sword aura was torn apart, and the sword in his hand was shattered. His entire body flew backward, spitting out a mouthful of blood in midair. One sword move had injured Tang Yuan. He would not be able to continue fighting for a short period of time. Fortunately, Tang Yuan was slightly stronger than Yao Xiang. In addition, Chu Mu's sword move was not as powerful as yesterday's, so Tang Yuan's injuries were not as serious as Yao Xiang's. Zhen Tian Sword Mansion, Chu Mu wins. Elder Long looked at Chu Mu and announced. A Providence dragon rushed out of Chu Mu's body and charged towards Tang Yuan. It took a longer time for it to return to Chu Mu. What a stunning sword move. I saw it again. Brilliant, brilliant. The people of the Great Kuin Sword Mansion were also very happy. The final battle continued. In the blink of an eye, the 50 battles of the second day's battle for Providence ended. On the third day, the battle for Providence continued. Chu Mu's opponent was the Great Minister Sword Mansion's Phantom Sword Mansion's Yun Su. Yun Su had comprehended the shadow mentality. It was based on the variation of the cloud mentality. It was even more unpredictable. Once it was used, there would be layers of phantoms that were unpredictable and unpredictable. As if he understood how terrifying Chu Mu's sword move was, Yun Su used his shadow the moment Elder Long announced the start of the final battle. The entire arena was filled with Yun Su's phantoms. This time, Chu Mu will not be able to defeat his opponent with one sword move. Yeah, there are layers of phantoms. It is impossible to find the real body unless his sword move can cover the entire arena. No one was optimistic about Chu Mu's chances in this battle. His sword move was indeed very powerful. However, if he could not find the target, he would not be able to attack. Chu Mu glanced around. There was a dark gold swirling in his eyes like a whirlpool. Countless phantoms swam around. At this moment, they all rushed towards Chu Mu from all directions. Each of the phantoms had a sword in their hands. They were filled with killing intent. It was as if each of the phantoms had a terrifying killing power. Sword hero sword skill. 1,000 phantoms slaughter. The monster slaying sword was unsheathed. He raised it up and slashed down. It was the same action as 2 days ago. It was another 10-meter-long dark gold crescent moon that cut through the void. It was equally shocking and stunning. However, many people were shocked. They felt that Chu Mu was attacking too fast. It looked like he was attacking randomly. This sword slashed towards the front and slightly to the left. With a boom, a human figure flew out like a cannonball. It crashed into the seal and bounced up. Countless phantoms disappeared in an instant. The Dragon of Providence rose from Chu Mu's body and flew out. When it returned, its length had increased a little. Zhen Tian sword hero Chu Mu wins. Elder Long's eyes flashed as he announced. He won again. The people of the Great Kuin Sword Mansion were shocked. Then they were overjoyed. He actually saw through the phantom sword hero's sword technique. The next battle was Lai Kongyang. However, his opponent had admitted defeat before entering the arena. This was already the third time. In other words, Lai Kongyang had not entered the arena yet. All of his opponents had admitted defeat. As for Lu Yuan, who was ranked second, and Ao Xingyun, who was ranked third, they had entered the arena once. However, they had also defeated their opponents with a simple sword move. It looked like they had done it effortlessly. On the fourth day, Chu Mu's opponent was the Great Sun Sword Mansion's Vast Sun Sword Hero, Li Dongshen. This sword hero had cultivated the fire concept, which was a mutated sun concept. His first move was his ultimate move. However, he was still defeated by Chu Mu's sword move, Stonequake Wave Sword. But now, the millions of spectators had named Chu Mu's sword move Waning Moon. For consecutive victories, Bailey Zhenghe was full of smiles. This was the first time in 60 years that the Great Kuin Sword Mansion had won. Right now, he really hoped that Chu Mu could continue winning, even though it might be an extravagant hope. After the referee was changed to Elder Long, the Great Kuin Sword Mansion was no longer targeted. The other 9 sword heroes had won and lost in the next 3 battles. Even though they lost more than they won, at least their morale wasn't low and they didn't feel despair. On the 5th day, Chu Mu's opponent was the Great Yen Sword Mansion's Vast Sky sword hero, Gu Changtian. Gu Changtian had been a sword hero for close to 7 years. He was very powerful and felt that he had the confidence to compete with Chu Mu. He might even be able to defeat Chu Mu. However, reality told him that it was impossible. It was still the same sword move. The 10-meter long dark golden waning moon seemed to have materialized. With one sword move, Gu Changtian's sword technique was broken and he was sent flying. Fortunately, he was powerful and didn't suffer serious injuries. However, he still spat out a mouthful of blood. The Sky Baron's sword chi had invaded his body and he had to use all his strength to suppress it and expel it bit by bit. So far, Chu Mu had won 5 consecutive victories. So far, among the 100 sword heroes, there were only about 20 who could maintain 5 consecutive victories. Chu Mu was one of them. Dark Horse, Big Dark Horse, Super Dark Horse. The millions of spectators were cheering because of Chu Mu. In every battle of Providence, there would definitely be a dark horse that would attract everyone's attention. This time it was Chu Mu. Moreover, he wasn't just a dark horse. In 5 battles, he had only used 5 sword moves and defeated all his opponents with 1 sword move. This wasn't something that could be described as a dark horse anymore. It was the title of a super dark horse. I wonder if Chu Mu can still defeat his opponents with 1 sword move tomorrow. I think it will be very difficult. According to the arrangement of his opponents tomorrow will definitely be stronger. Just wait and see. I have confidence in him. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 464. Chu Mu thrust his sword forward, and a finger-thick, dark, golden sword ray pierced through the air like an aurora. Sky-splitting sword strike. His opponent couldn't dodge at all. His protective sword chi was pierced through, and his upper grade armor was also pierced through. He was sent flying backward. Defeated, the Dragon of Providence rushed out and returned. At this moment, the Dragon of Providence was almost 10 meters long. At this point, the Battle of Providence had been going on for 12 days. Tomorrow would be the 13th day. For the past 12 days, Chu Mu had fought a battle every day. So far, he hadn't lost a single battle. Moreover, he had defeated all his opponents with 1 sword strike. However, it wasn't limited to the 10-meter-long dark, golden crescent moon. Sometimes it would be a finger-thick, dark, golden aurora. Everyone now knew that Chu Mu had more than 1 trick up his sleeve. Whether it was the dark, golden crescent moon or the dark, golden aurora, they were both extremely powerful. Once they were used, they would definitely defeat their opponents. Stone-shaking wave sword strike and sky-splitting sword strike. These were two completely different sword skills. Stone-shaking wave sword strike won with its power and covered a larger area. Sky-splitting sword strike won with its speed and covered a smaller area. However, its power was equally terrifying. As the battles progressed, Chu Mu's opponents became stronger and stronger. However, they were still not qualified for Chu Mu to use his full strength. However, the 12th opponent had accumulated for more than 9 years and was extremely powerful. Chu Mu had to use all of his sky-splitting sword strike's power to defeat his opponent with one sword strike. If the 13th opponent was even stronger, Chu Mu would have to use his sword intent if he wanted to defeat his opponent with one sword strike. However, he still planned to keep his sword intent as a trump card. He didn't want to reveal it so early. During this period, Lai Kongyang had fought once. His opponent was a sword master who had accumulated for more than 10 years. However, under Lai Kongyang's sword, this powerful sword master couldn't even block one sword strike and was sent flying backward. Lai Kongyang looked calm and relaxed. That sword strike seemed to have been done casually. It looked very ordinary and did not have the slightest trace of smoke or fire. There was also no powerful fluctuation coming from it. It looked like a child wielding a sword. However, it was that casual sword strike that defeated a powerful sword grandmaster who had accumulated experience for 10 years. In that instant, countless people narrowed their eyes as their hearts trembled. The sword hero monarch is indeed worthy of his name. In that instant, Chu Mu was tempted, and his sword intent almost shot out into the sky. Fortunately, he controlled it in time and didn't expose himself. However, Chu Mu's desire to fight Lai Kongyang grew even stronger. He wished that Elder Long would arrange for him to fight Lai Kongyang right now. He wished that he could fight Lai Kongyang to his heart's content and give it his all. Even if he lost in the end, he would not regret it. No, fighting at the top is the best, Chu Mu said to himself. Every opponent defeated was a kind of training for oneself, a kind of tempering for one's will, and a kind of improvement for one's essence, energy, and spirit. Defeating one opponent after another would allow one's essence, energy, and spirit to reach the peak. Then, one would be able to fight with the strongest opponent in the peak state. Only in this way could one explode with the strongest battle strength and perform the most exciting battle. This principle was understood by any swordsman who had cultivated to a certain level. Therefore, Elder Long had to think carefully about the arrangement of the competition. He wanted to let those who could win continuously defeat their opponents until the end of the competition. This was the way of the competition. Heaven-breaking sword Grandmaster Lu Yuan, who was recognized as second place, had 8 of his opponents admit defeat. He fought in 4 battles and also used one sword strike. His sword was different from Lai Kongyang's. It was filled with a terrifying destructive aura, as if it wanted to destroy everything. With one sword strike, it crushed everything and defeated his opponents easily. Heaven-breaking sword Grand Master Ao Xingyun, who was recognized as third place, fought in 7 battles. In the other 5 battles, his opponents automatically admitted defeat and didn't even step onto the battle arena. Ao Xingyun's sword had a vast and majestic aura. Facing his sword, one would feel insignificant. Unsurprisingly, his opponents couldn't withstand one sword strike from him and were easily defeated. Chu Mu is really incredible. Yes, it has been 12 battles since the first battle, and he hasn't lost a single battle. This is really incredible. One sword strike. I can't believe it. He defeated all 12 battles with one sword strike. Am I dreaming? This shouldn't be. The great Kuin Sword Mansion's providence has only been 40 feet for the past 10 years. It can't be compared with the other sword mansions. Logically speaking, there shouldn't be such a student. This was the doubt in the hearts of the other 9 sword mansions, except for Bailey Jianghe. At the same time, it was also the doubt in the hearts of many people. Our great Kuin Sword Mansion has been declining for 60 years. Finally, we are going to rise again. Bailey Jiang, his face was beaming with joy. The other elders were also overjoyed. Even Qin Bu was excited. They believed that even if the great Kuin Sword Mansion obtained the last place in the province this time, the great Kuin Sword Mansion could still rise again. This was because they had Chu Mu. If I remember correctly, there are only 4 people who have won 12 battles in a row and haven't lost a single battle. Elder Long, who was in the sky, said to himself, Sky-burning Sword Grand Master Lai Kongyang, Heaven-breaking Sword Grand Master Lu Yuan, Heaven-breaking Sword Grand Master Ao Xingyun, Zhen Tian Sword Grand Master Chu Mu. Be it Lai Kongyang, Lu Yuan, or Ao Xingyun, they all became Sword Grand Masters 10 years ago. They have been accumulating for at least 11 years. In addition, their talents are obviously superior to other Sword Grand Masters. It is normal for them to have such strength. However, Chu Mu only became a Sword Grand Master 3 years ago. To think that he also has such strength. Even Sword Grand Masters who have been accumulating for 10 years can't compare to him. Strange, this is really strange. However, no matter if it was Lai Kongyang, Lu Yuan, or Ao Xingyun, they all defeated their opponents very easily. They didn't use any powerful sword techniques. Only this Chu Mu repeatedly used powerful sword techniques. Those 2 sword techniques should be his best sword techniques. Elder Long thought again. If that's the case, even if this Chu Mu is powerful, there is a limit to how powerful he is. He is still unable to compete with Lai Kongyang and the other 2. However, if he is given enough time, his future achievements might not be inferior to the 3 of them. As an expert on the same level as the sword of Gojoseon, Elder Long's eyes were very sharp. He felt that he was right. Apart from Chu Mu, the other 9 sword grandmasters of the great Kuin Sword Mansion had won and lost 12 consecutive battles. However, in terms of wins and losses, they had more wins than losses. Among them, the one who won the most battles had only won 5 battles, while the one who won the least had won 2 battles. If it wasn't for the super dark horse Chu Mu, the great Kuin Sword Mansion would have been wiped out again. Chu Mu's rise was like a bright sun that illuminated tens of thousands of people. From the start of the battles until now, Chu Mu's strength should be more or less displayed. An elder from the great Kuin Sword Mansion chuckled and said, However, even so, apart from the 3 of them, there probably aren't many who can match up to Chu Mu. That's right. I feel that as long as he doesn't encounter the 3 of them, Chu Mu should be able to continue winning and obtain more fate power. He might even be able to obtain more than 10 meters, said the second elder. If Chu Mu can obtain more than 10 meters of fate power in the end, together with the fate power obtained by the other 9 sword grandmasters, our great Kuin Sword Mansion should be able to obtain more than 10 meters of fate power, said the third elder with a chuckle. His face was filled with joy from the bottom of his heart. What I'm most worried about now is whether Chu Mu will encounter the 3 of them. According to my estimation, the 3 of them should have comprehended sword intent, said Bailey Jianghe in a serious tone as he wiped the smile off his face. According to the normal progression, every swordsman would be able to comprehend sword force after reaching the Qi High Realm. Once they reached the complete Qi High Realm, they would be able to comprehend sword force to the small success stage. This was the most normal situation. After breaking through the Qi High Realm and entering the 9th transformation realm, the sword force would continue to improve until it reached the peak of sword force. This kind of comprehension and improvement was inevitable for every swordsman. There was nothing special about it. It was just like a person's strength would naturally increase as they grew older. As for sword intent, it was something that could only be comprehended when a swordsman reached the true realm. It was above sword force and was the second step of the sword Dao. Other than naturally comprehending the sword Dao, there were some special cases where a swordsman with outstanding talent would be able to comprehend sword intent in advance. For example, some swordsmen could comprehend sword force when they were in the Qi transformation realm. Chu Mu had comprehended sword force when he was in the sword Qi realm. Naturally, there were also some swordsmen who could comprehend sword intent before reaching the true realm. However, as the second step of the sword Dao, sword intent was 10 times more profound than sword force. It was mysterious and unpredictable, and was 100 times more difficult to comprehend than sword force. It was even more difficult to comprehend sword intent in advance. Even many talented swordsmen could only comprehend sword intent after reaching the late stage of the 9th transformation realm. Swordsmen who could comprehend sword intent in the early stage of the 9th transformation realm were all super geniuses. Those who could comprehend sword intent before reaching the 9th transformation realm were all top geniuses. There were also differences between geniuses. Normal geniuses, super geniuses, top geniuses, and top geniuses. The sword master level also belonged to the Qi Si realm. A sword master who could comprehend sword intent was 1 in 1,000. And now, the 3 people in Bailey Jianghe's group should have comprehended sword intent. They were also top geniuses. Among them, Lai Kongyang was most likely a top genius. Sword intent was something that all 11 of them had. It was just that the levels were different. They were all very clear about the power of sword intent. Even if it was just a fraction of sword intent, its power would still be at the peak of sword force. The difference between the two was like the difference between wood and steel. If Chu Mu continues to win, he will have to face one of the 3 of them sooner or later. This is an unavoidable battle. One of the elders nodded and said, "This kind of battle is also beneficial for Chu Mu. I believe that even if he loses, Chu Mu will still gain something. Who knows, maybe after experiencing sword intent, Chu Mu will be able to comprehend sword intent in a few years and increase his strength greatly." While Bailey Jianghe was talking with the 10 elders, Chu Mu and the rest of the 10 stayed in their rooms and meditated. The dragon of fate that was close to 10 feet long brought great benefits to Chu Mu. It made the effect of his comprehension more obvious and increased by several times. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 465. The super dark horse Chu Mu's reputation was extremely resounding. Everyone in the East Saint City knew about him. This was because the million swordsmen who were watching the Battle of Providence would spread the news of what they had seen every day after they left the heaven-extinguishing sword arena. There were even people who were in charge of compiling the daily battle reports, which recorded the details of every single match. A battle report cost 1,000 low-grade spiritual stones. This price was rather high, but there were many people who wanted to buy it. Every day, the supply could not meet the demand. Since they could not see it with their own eyes, they could only see the situation from the battle reports. It was better than not knowing anything. Some merchants in the East Saint City had also opened bets for 4 people, Lai Kongyang, Lu Yuan, Ao Xingyan, and Chu Mu. Chu Mu's odds were rather high. It was a pity that he was in the East Saint Palace and did not know about it. Otherwise, he would have made a fortune by betting on himself. On the 13th day, the Battle of Providence started again. One battle after another, each with their own victory and defeat. Chu Mu once again appeared on the battle arena. His opponent was a female swordsman from the Bright Moon Sword Mansion. Her name was Yen Yuro, and she was known as the Extreme Ice Sword Hero. She was very beautiful, but her expression was very cold. Her eyes were even colder. She constantly emitted a cold aura, as if she was a block of ice. She was dressed in a moon-white long robe with traces of icy blue. She looked like a glacier under the sunlight, and there was a soul-stirring beauty to her. The Extreme Ice Sword Hero, Yen Yuro, had won 12 matches and lost 11. She had lost 1 match, and that match was under the sword of Lu Yuan. The strength of the Extreme Ice Sword Hero was obvious to all, and Chu Mu was equally strong. However, None of the opponents he had faced so far could compare to the extreme ice sword hero. Who do you think will win, the Gentian sword hero or the extreme ice sword hero? I support the extreme ice sword hero. We will only know the outcome after the battle. I heard that the extreme ice sword hero possesses the rare extreme ice sword body. In my opinion, Chu Mu's winning streak will be broken this time. The extreme ice sword body is an innate sword body that is one level higher than the ice spirit sword body. It can easily comprehend the concept of ice and raise it to perfection in the shortest amount of time. Moreover, it can increase the power of the concept of ice by 20%, which is one level higher than the ice spirit sword body. Under the extreme ice sword physique, one can unleash 120% of the ice concept's power. How terrifying! Her extreme ice sword technique is also very powerful. The concept of ice was originally stronger than the concept of water. The power of the 100% concept of ice was probably close to the 110% concept of water. If it was increased by another 20%, its power would be close to the 130% concept of water. Thinking of this, Chu Mu felt a little excited. In terms of sword chi cultivation, he had just broken through to the chi high realm last night. Deshang, on the other hand, had been at the peak of the chi high realm for a few years and had accumulated a lot of experience. In terms of sword chi purity, Chu Mu was not inferior to his opponent at all. This was because the sword chi art that he cultivated was of the earth level. The higher the level of the sword chi art, the more precious it was. Among the 100 sword heroes participating in the Battle of Fortune, other than Chu Mu, the highest level sword chi art was Lai Kongyang's. It was of the earth level upper level. The higher the level of the sword chi art, the thicker and purer the sword chi cultivated. Therefore, in terms of sword aura, Chu Mu's Desolate Sky sword aura was only slightly inferior to Yenyuro's in terms of density and purity. However, the opponent had the extreme ice sword body. Other than the 20% increase in ice concept, it also had a clear increase in ice-type sword aura. As Elder Long announced the start of the battle, Yenyuro slashed out with her sword. Her extreme rank sword was the Ice Soul Sword. It looked like it was made out of ice and was emitting a shockingly cold chi. As she slashed out with her sword, a ray of ice shot towards Chu Mu. Extreme ice break. As the cold chi descended, the air was filled with countless ice shards. Chu Mu could clearly feel the shocking cold chi rolling towards him, as if it was going to freeze him. The entire arena was covered by the cold chi, as if it had suddenly entered a cold winter. Yenyuro's sword attack looked simple, but it actually contained the chi of heaven and earth. Her ice sword chi and concept of ice had been enhanced by the extreme ice sword body, making it extremely powerful. Everyone opened their eyes wide, wanting to see how Chu Mu would deal with it. Would he use the same method as before to defeat his opponent with one sword attack? In the previous 12 battles, Chu Mu did not try to dodge at all. Instead, he faced his opponent's sword skill head-on and defeated his opponent with one sword attack. Now, facing Yenyuro's sword skill, what would Chu Mu do? After slashing out her sword attack, Yenyuro's body flashed. Her feet seemed to be skating on ice, but her speed was unbelievably fast. In the blink of an eye, she appeared behind Chu Mu and stabbed out again. Extreme ice thorn. With a simple slide, Yenyuro's surroundings immediately changed. A layer of frost covered the ground of the arena. The cold chi was biting cold, and a world of ice and snow was descending. To Yenyuro, this kind of environment was the most beneficial for her. To the others, it was disadvantageous. Their strength would be limited, and in this kind of situation, Yenyuro's chances of winning would be higher. The spectators could also see this, and could not help but worry for Chu Mu. Only Lai Kongyang, Lu Yuan, and Ao Xingyan did not have any thoughts about this. Indeed, there was a connection between the environment and strength. However, when the difference in strength was too big, No matter how good the environment was, it would only give one a slight advantage. In the end, one would still lose to absolute strength. Of course, their thoughts were directed at themselves. In their opinion, this was the end for Chumu. In front of him, there was a powerful blast of ice with astonishing power. Behind him, there was a sword stabbing out. This sword was wrapped in cold chi and made a whimpering sound. The sword was condensed with 100% ice concept. An entire sword seemed to be one size bigger. The power was very condensed and terrifying. Just as the sword stabbed out, Chumu felt a layer of ice spread over his protective sword chi. It was as if it was about to be broken, and it made a creaking sound. If it was the Tianyuan sword chi of the past, it would have already been broken. However, the protective sword chi formed by the Tianyuan sword chi was very strong, and it also had corrosive properties. When Yenjuro's sword stabbed out, a large part of the cold chi was corroded by the Tianyuan sword chi. The remaining small part only covered the surface. Yenjuro's eyes flashed with a hint of surprise. The speed of her sword suddenly increased by 30%, and its power also increased by 30%. How would Chumu deal with a pincer attack from the front and back? Everyone's attention was lifted. This was a very important scene. Other than Chan Bu-er, everyone from the great Kuin sword mansion stood up and subconsciously clenched their fists. Even though Chumu had won 12 matches in a row, and this result was much better than any tournament in the past 60 years, they still felt very happy. However, at this moment, they still hoped that Chumu could continue to win. Perhaps it was an extravagant hope, but it was the deepest expectation in their hearts. Yenjuro made full use of her advantage and raised her speed to the extreme. With a pincer attack from the front and back, Chumu's situation was critical. Yenjuro's fighting style also exceeded Chumu's expectations, but it was not enough to shock Chumu. This was the first time Chumu used the flying swan illusory steps on the battle arena. A strange scene appeared. In everyone's eyes, Chumu seemed to be retreating, and the angle of Yenjuro's sword also adjusted. It was as though she had locked onto Chumu. In the next moment, everyone realized that Chumu was advancing. He appeared on the other side of Yenjuro. When he was a few meters away, he unsheathed his sword and slashed down. A dark, golden waning moon that was more than 10 meters long appeared again. Whether it was the world of ice and snow or the daytime, all the light disappeared. Only darkness enveloped the area. A dark, golden waning moon was extremely resplendent. It instantly broke through the darkness and slashed towards Yenjuro. Yenjuro's expression, which was like a 10,000-year-old iceberg, suddenly changed. Not only did the ice that she slashed out not attack Chumu, but it was also bombarding her. Her second sword technique was aimed at the other side where the illusion was. More importantly, Chumu's counterattack had already arrived. Yenjuro had already seen the power of the dark, golden, waning moon 12 times. It was because she did not want to face Chumu's sword technique head-on that Yenjuro had come up with this strategy. She wanted to make full use of her advantage and freeze the ground, which would increase her speed to the extreme. At the same time, she wanted to cover the surroundings with cold air, which would affect Chumu's agility to a certain extent. Strengthening herself and weakening her opponent was a very correct strategy. At the same time, it was also unexpected. Yenjuro was sure that she had an 80% chance of winning. Unfortunately, she had underestimated Chumu. Everyone had underestimated Chumu. The second level of the flying swan illusory steps was more than 10 times more exquisite than the first level. Yenjuro reacted quickly. Her feet slid on the ice surface to the side. The ice that was bombarding her swept past her side, making her black hair flutter. She tried her best to pull back her sword. The dark, golden waning moon was not far away from her. Unless she could increase her speed by 2 times, she would not be able to dodge it. She drew a circle in front of her with her sword. The ice sword chi and the ice mentality mixed together. A diamond-shaped, circular mirror appeared in front of her. Extreme snow, cold ice mirror. The cold ice mirror was the only defensive sword move of Yen Yuro's extreme snow sword arts. Its defensive power was very strong. With a boom, the stone-shaking wave sword slashed onto the cold ice mirror. The cold ice mirror instantly shook and exploded. It turned into countless ice shards that shot out in all directions. The powerful impact crashed onto Yen Yuro's body, shattering her protective sword chi and sending her flying back. Yen Yuro was very powerful. She did not crash into the seal or fall down. However, her face was pale and there was blood at the corner of her mouth. That sword attack had already damaged her organs. Following that, Yen Yuro's expression changed. She felt that there was a strange sword chi inside her body that was constantly corroding and destroying. She had to use her ice sword chi to suppress it. The scene suddenly became silent. Everyone stared with their eyes wide open, speechless. "You win," Yen Yuro said after a long while. Her voice was very cold, almost freezing everyone. Following her words, a fate dragon rushed out of Chumu's body and rushed towards Yen Yuro. When it came back, it was already more than 10 meters long. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 466. What a terrifying battle awareness, Chinbuer said to himself. The battle between Chumu and Yen Yuro ended in just a few breaths of time. It didn't seem to be anything special, but only an expert like him could see the profoundness of that moment. Chumu's reaction was to be able to accurately grasp the best timing in an unfavorable environment, dodge and counterattack. Even the slightest mistake in timing wouldn't do. You are indeed quite powerful and worthy of my attention. Ao Xingyin smiled faintly. However, it's hard to say how many strikes you can take from me. Lu Yuan also smiled and didn't say anything. He only looked towards the Deqian, sword abode, and locked onto Lai Kongyang. In his mind, there was only one opponent, Lai Kongyang. He didn't care about anyone else, including Ao Xingyin. As for Lai Kongyang, he didn't have any expression. He didn't care about such strength at all. Perhaps Lu Yuan could force him to take 2 more strikes. That was all. Up until now, he had won 13 consecutive battles. It wasn't easy to defeat Yen Yuro, especially with 1 strike. It had to be said that Yen Yuro was unlucky. Of all the people she could fight, she had to fight Chumu. Although Chumu's ripping concept wasn't perfect, it had reached 98% and wasn't far from perfect. Its power was equivalent to a 128% metal concept. In terms of the power of the concept, Yen Yuro's ice concept had reached 120% of the water concept under the amplification of the extreme ice sword physique. It wasn't much different from Chumu's. In terms of the exquisiteness of her sword technique, it wasn't any worse than Chumu's Stonequake sword. In terms of the cultivation of her sword aura, she was even slightly better than Chumu. In particular, her extreme ice sword technique had become even more terrifying under the amplification of the extreme ice sword physique. It was a pity that she couldn't withstand Chumu's Stonequake force. The power of the perfect stone tremor energy was extremely powerful. It was not inferior to the perfect ordinary energy concept. This meant that the Stonequake wave sword was much more powerful than her extreme ice sword technique. Of course, without the Stonequake, the power of Chumu's sword could not compare to Yen Yuro's extreme ice sword technique. The combination of all kinds of forces, coupled with the timing and control of the entire battle situation, finally completed a counterattack that seemed simple but was actually difficult for many people. Staying in his room, Chumu recalled his battle with Yen Yuro while continuing to comprehend the tearing concept. Once the concept was raised to perfection, the power would become even stronger. For example, The difference between a 98% and a 99% rending intent couldn't be compared to the difference between 99% and 100% rending intent. With the support of the 10-foot-long destiny dragon, Chu Mu's perception became even more terrifying. After a single night, his tearing concept had risen to 99%. This was an increase in absolute strength. After a short rest, the sky brightened up. The 14th day's battle for fortune was about to begin. Basically, up until now, the focus of the battle had been on the 4 undefeated sword heroes. The battles between the others had become a foil. This was something that couldn't be helped. Moreover, according to the rules of the past, once a victor was decided between the 4 of them and the strongest was determined, the battle for karmic luck would come to an end. Chu Mu estimated that in today's battle, the 4 of them would have to face each other. It was just that he didn't know who would face who. After a few battles, Elder Long announced loudly, Lai Kongyang and Ao Xingyan's figures flashed and appeared on the battle arena together. All of a sudden, the entire heaven-battling sword arena seemed to explode. The cheers were like waves. The 3rd and 1st sword heroes were finally going to clash. Lai Kongyang, I have been waiting for this moment for a long time. The battle intent in Ao Xingyan's eyes burned fiercely. He pulled out his sword and pointed it at Lai Kongyang. His voice was like thunder. I have nothing to look forward to. Lai Kongyang, on the other hand, had a calm and indifferent expression. Those who were familiar with Lai Kongyang would not be deceived by his appearance. How could a person who is known as the Burning Heaven Sword hero have such a leisurely appearance? He was just looking down on his opponent's strength. Soon, you will take back your words. Ao Xingyan grinned. A terrifying sharpness soared into the sky, shaking heaven and earth. It was purer, more illusory, and sharper than the sword aura. It was as if it could cut through everything. Sword intent. 3 parts sword intent. All the swordsmen who could recognize the sword intent were stunned. Their eyes were filled with shock. Even if some people had guessed it, guesses were just guesses. Seeing it with their own eyes was truly shocking. He really comprehended sword intent. Bailey Jiang, he shook his head, his face filled with bitterness. Even the 3rd Ao Xingyan comprehended sword intent. Not to mention the 2nd Lu Yuan and 1st Lai Kongyang. Lord, actually, Chu Mu was able to win 13 battles in a row. It was completely out of our expectations. Even if he stops here, we should still be happy. An elder advised. Chinbuer glanced at Chu Mu. He was a little confused because he didn't see any worry on Chu Mu's face. Instead, after a flash of surprise, there was a trace of excitement and battle intent. Could it be that Chu Mu also comprehended sword intent? Chen Bu couldn't help but think. He immediately shook his head and thought that it was impossible. He was extremely talented, but he also only comprehended sword intent when he broke through to the 9th transformation realm. He knew very well how difficult it was to comprehend sword intent at the Chi-Hai realm. He knew that in the past 1,000 years, there were no more than 10 swordsmen in the entire eastern sword region who could comprehend sword intent at the Chi-Hai realm. In the entire Great Kuan dynasty, there wasn't even one. You have piqued my interest. Lai Kongyang's eyes moved as he smiled. Compared to his casual attitude before, he seemed to be a little more serious. If you don't use your true strength, you will lose. Ao Xingyan, whose sword intent reached the clouds, threw out a sword attack. This sword attack seemed to break the space in front of him. Lai Kongyang threw out a sword attack and counterattacked. There was also a ripple of sword intent. The 2 sword chi that contained sword intent canceled each other out. Ao Xingyan's body suddenly appeared in midair. He threw out a sword attack from above. In an instant, a vast aura descended. A visible purple light was like a line between heaven and earth. There was no beginning and no end. This strike contained 100% concept of lightning, dense and pure sword chi from a mid-grade earth rank sword chi technique. and the fusion of sword intent. Moreover, it was a technique that was summed up from the foundation of these three to form this powerful sword skill. This sword attack gave people the feeling that it was impossible to dodge, because you couldn't see the beginning or the end. It seemed that no matter where you were, you would be hit. Sword hero, sword skill, a line in the sky. Interesting. A hint of a smile flashed across Lai Kongyang's face. He did not dodge, nor did he move his feet. His sword drooped down, and then he swung it up. Nothing special happened. In an instant, a red light shot across the sky. This sword attack contained 100% fire intent, and even purer and thicker sword chi from a high earth realm sword chi art, and a sword intent that was as strong as Ao Xingyan's. Sword hero sword skill, flame cut. Lai Kongyang has used a sword skill. Many people were excited because this was Lai Kongyang's true sword technique from the start of the battle up until now. As soon as the flame cut was used, the sky and earth seemed to be separated by this red sword light. The purple light slashed horizontally, and the red light slashed vertically, forming a red and purple cross. With a popping sound like a bubble bursting, the purple light was cut in half by the red light. It flew past Lai Kongyang's left and right sides, creating countless ripples on the seal. The red light slashed towards Ao Xingyan, who was in midair. Ao Xingyan only felt that the world in front of him had disappeared. There was only a bright red light that kept enlarging and filling his eyes. It couldn't contain anything else. Good timing. Ao Xingyan's battle intent was almost crazy. He held his sword with both hands and raised it again in midair. Sword chi and sword intent mixed together and gushed out. Purple lightning wrapped around him like a thunder god. Take my full power sword attack. One sword, shocking the heavens, as if a thunder god's roar shook the heavens and earth. Ao Xingyan's sword slashed down. This sword was 10 times more resplendent than Chu Mu's dark golden waning moon, 10 times more breathtaking, and 10 times more powerful. One shocking the heavens. Ao Xingyan's famous sword skill was also his best sword skill. His most powerful sword attack could even shock the sky and earth. When this sword attack was used, it was either victory or defeat. Still not enough. Lai Kongyang sighed softly. He raised his head and looked at the purple light that cut across the sky. It was 10 times more intense than the previous purple light. The red light dissipated as soon as it touched. It was as if the sky and earth were falling apart. The moon was destroyed and the stars were sinking. The hard ground of the arena that had been sealed could not withstand this terrifying pressure. Layers of ripples spread out as if it was going to shatter at any time. Lai Kongyang was like an ant in front of that purple light. He was incomparably small, but no one dared to underestimate him. His black hair danced wildly. There was a flame burning in Lai Kongyang's eyes. The sword in his hand seemed to ignite by itself. This flame turned from red to green, without a trace of impurity. Perfection meant that the flame's temperature was unbelievably high. It was still one sword attack. From left to right, the green light shot out violently. Sword hero sword skill, green flame cut. With a boom, the green light and purple light collided and exploded. Everyone felt as if there was a sudden clap of thunder in their ears. The explosion made everyone feel dizzy and on the verge of collapse. Countless green and purple lights exploded like fireworks. They shot out in all directions and hit on the seal, creating layers of ripples like a rainstorm. A large amount of green and purple light formed a mixed shockwave that rushed towards Ao Xingyan in midair. This strange scene made people's pupils contract rapidly. It showed Lai Kongyang's shocking control. Just from this point, it could be seen how big the gap between Ao Xingyan and Lai Kongyang was. A figure flew out and rushed towards the sky before falling down again. Ao Xingyan's face was a little pale. Sword Hero King is indeed worthy of its name. Although I still have some energy left, I am still not your opponent. Ao Xing very calmly admitted that he was not as good as Lai Kongyang. He had used all of his strength in that strike, just now. On the other hand, looking at Lai Kongyang's expression, it would be good if he had used 70% of his strength. I lost. As his voice fell, the fate dragon on Lai Kongyang's body rushed out. When it returned, it was already close to 40 feet long. Great Qian Sword Mansion's sky-burning sword hero Lai Kongyang wins. Elder Long announced loudly. Without giving everyone time to digest, he announced again, the next battle, Hidden Dragon Sword Mansion's sky-breaking sword hero Lu Yuan versus. At the same time, he looked towards the great Koin Sword Mansion. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qijin. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 467. Lu Yuan. Lu Yuan. Lu Yuan. Chu Mu. Chu Mu. Chu Mu. Lu Yuan will definitely win. Bullshit. Maybe Chu Mu will win. Impossible. Chu Mu is indeed very powerful, but that depends on who he is compared to. Ao Xingyan has comprehended sword intent, so Lu Yuan must have comprehended sword intent as well. Even if it's just a fraction of sword intent, its power is still much greater than the extreme sword force. Chu Mu is definitely not Lu Yuan's match. You're right. Heaven Breaker and Jin Tian. Heaven Breaker is definitely stronger. Among the millions of viewers, a portion of them were Chu Mu's fans, but they were not loyal enough. Therefore, they could not refute Lu Yuan's words. Subconsciously, they also felt that Chu Mu was indeed no match for Lu Yuan, even though they did not want to admit it. Do you hear their voices? Lu Yuan stood in front of Chu Mu. Looking at Chu Mu, he smiled faintly and said, "You are not my match. I advise you not to humiliate yourself." How do you know I'm not your opponent if we haven't even fought? Chu Mu asked, amused. It is very unexpected for you to be able to win 13 matches in a row until now. I heard that you have such strength after becoming a sword hero for only 3 years. Your talent is very impressive. If I give you a few more years, you might be able to make me take you seriously. Lu Yuan said slowly. The confidence and condescension in his tone was very obvious. I can see that you are a person with a strong will. Otherwise, you wouldn't have achieved what you have today. Since that's the case, I'll let you use those 2 sword skills and then admit defeat yourself. Otherwise, you'll have to bear the consequences. Lu Yuan is so domineering. Senior brother Lu is really too domineering. Towards Lu Yuan's words, Chu Mu merely laughed. The other party's tone and attitude was like an elder speaking to a younger generation. Others might think that it was natural and right, and that he was very domineering. However, in Chu Mu's eyes, it was merely an act of self-righteousness. As you wish, Chu Mu replied calmly. He unsheathed the demon-slaying sword, and a 10-meter-long, dark, golden crescent moon appeared. It was still so breathtaking and soul-stirring. Lu Yuan's figure flashed, and the dark, golden crescent moon slashed at the seal, creating slight ripples. Chu Mu casually stabbed out with a sword again, and a finger-thick, dark, golden sword light shot towards Lu Yuan. Lu Yuan easily dodged it, and the sky-splitter sword hit the seal, and once again, a slight ripple spread out. Both strikes missed. Chu Mu knew that the power of those 2 strikes was not bad, but to the current him, it was already outdated. It could not do anything to Lu Yuan at all, so he just casually attacked. Those who did not understand began to argue. They thought that since Chu Mu's 2 strikes could not do anything to Lu Yuan, he was definitely not Lu Yuan's match. Now, tell me your answer. Do you want to admit defeat obediently, or do you want me to beat you down? Lu Yuan looked at Chu Mu and said calmly, a trace of cold lightning in his eyes, "You have nothing to be proud of in front of me," Chu Mu replied calmly. In that case, Lu Yuan did not finish a sentence, and his body suddenly emitted an aura that soared into the sky. A majestic sword pressure that seemed to pierce through the sky swept out like an invisible storm, and in the blink of an eye, it wreaked havoc in the entire arena. Ordinary sword masters would find it difficult to withstand this kind of sword pressure, but Chu Mu's expression did not change. He was like a pillar that supported the sky, and no matter how strong the storm was, he would not move. A trace of surprise flashed in Lu Yuan's eyes. Chu Mu was not affected by his sword pressure at all, which was beyond his expectations. "Very good. You have successfully aroused my interest," Lu Yuan said. His expression changed, and cold lightning flashed in his eyes. His body swayed, and his feet seemed to take random steps. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Chu Mu. Two faint, golden flaming tails streaked across the sky like shooting stars. That was because Lu Yuan's speed was too fast, and it left behind a bright light in the air. The golden long sword pierced through the air and slashed towards Chu Mu's neck. It was as fast as lightning. So fast! Many people were shocked. To break the sky, not only must you have enough power, you must also have enough speed, the Hidden Dragon Sword Mansion's mansion master said softly. A.O. Xingyun's eyes lit up, and a trace of interest flashed in Lai Kongyang's eyes. Lu Yuan's speed was very fast, and it was beyond Chu Mu's expectations. However, it was not beyond Chu Mu's acceptable range. The demon-slaying sword was raised diagonally. There was no block, only counterattack. In terms of sword speed, Chu Mu was faster. If Lu Yuan continued to attack, Chu Mu's sword would hit him first. Although he was very confident in his protective sword chi, he wanted to win beautifully. His body swayed, and Lu Yuan dodged Chu Mu's sword. He appeared beside Chu Mu and stabbed out again. Chu Mu turned his wrist, and the sword he had raised was leveled. It slashed horizontally at an even speed, aiming straight for Lu Yuan's neck. Lu Yuan did not dodge this time. His sword suddenly shook, and a sword flower with 12 petals appeared instantly. It was very lifelike, and it enveloped Chu Mu's entire head. Chu Mu's sword tip shook slightly, and a wave of sword light was heard. Shoo! 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 Countless tiny sword light crisscrossed, shattering the sword flower. The sword light then condensed into a cold star and shot towards Lu Yuan. Although Lu Yuan was surprised by Chu Mu's superb sword art, he did not have any intention of backing off. He waved his long sword, shattering the cold star. Countless finger-sized golden lights pierced through the air, and each of them contained a powerful piercing mentality. 100% of the piercing mentality was equivalent to 120% of the metal mentality. The piercing mentality was a mutation of the metal mentality. Its power was reflected in the piercing, which was extremely sharp. It was different from the cutting mentality, as it brought out the piercing power of the metal mentality to the extreme. It was a rare, mutated mentality. Chu Mu could clearly feel the sharpness of the opponent's golden sword aura. The aura directly pierced through his protective sword aura and came straight at him. The demon-slaying sword slashed out in a small area, shattering the sword light one after another. It then turned into little cold stars to counterattack. In terms of power, the tearing mentality was more powerful than the piercing mentality. Everyone opened their eyes wide without blinking. They could see that Chu Mu and Lu Yuan were using basic sword arts in the battle. The two were attacking each other with their swords almost face to face. During the attack, they had to dissolve the other's attack and then counterattack. There was no dodging. Moreover, every sword attack contained a powerful mentality and sword chi. The power was extremely shocking, and it was 10 times more dangerous than using sword arts. After all, when using sword arts, there would always be some distance between the two parties, and there would be more time. Moreover, using sword arts required some time. Although the time was very short, it was different for basic sword arts. For a swordsman who could become a sword hero, the basic sword arts had already been cultivated to the point that it had become an instinct. Often, before the mind could react, the body would have already followed the instinct as the best reaction. Ao Xingyun and Lai Kongyang both squinted their eyes. They were a little surprised that Chu Mu's sword arts were so high that he could fight with Lu Yuan without being at a disadvantage. In a short span of 10 breaths, Chu Mu and Lu Yuan had attacked each other hundreds of times. Every time, they would first break the opponent's attack and then counterattack. Once hit, even if the opponent didn't die, he would be injured. The two swords were unbelievably fast, and people couldn't see them clearly. They could only vaguely see a blurry sword shadow. Everyone held their breaths. At this time, no one talked about anything because they couldn't think of anything else. They wished they could grow a few more eyes, and they wished they could have a photographic memory to remember the scene. After another 10 breaths, the two swords inevitably collided a few times. Countless sparks splashed out, and the ear-piercing sound of metal clashing resounded throughout the battle arena. Elder Long in the sky revealed a surprised look. Like everyone else, he also thought that Chu Mu would be defeated by Lu Yuan in a few moves. But now, it seemed that this wasn't the case. At least until now, Chu Mu didn't show any signs of being at a disadvantage. On the contrary, Lu Yuan was almost hit by Chu Mu several times and seemed to be at a disadvantage. This was obviously a very inconceivable thing. Every powerful swordsman was not only powerful in their sword skills, but also in their basic swordsmanship. For a powerful swordsman, basic swordsmanship was an indispensable foundation. The more powerful a swordsman was, the more he would understand the importance of basic swordsmanship. As one of the strongest sword masters in the Eastern sword domain, Lu Yuan understood this very well. He had also spent a period of time painstakingly training his basic sword techniques. Therefore, in terms of mastery of basic sword techniques, Lu Yuan was confident that he was not inferior to Lai Kongyang. But now, not only was he unable to gain the upper hand in the prolonged battle with Chu Mu, but he was also in a disadvantageous position. How could Lu Yuan not be shocked? It's time for real. That's right. Since I can't defeat Chu Mu with my swordsmanship, I can only use my true strength. Chu Mu's figure flickered as he dodged the swoosh of swords. However, he did not approach immediately. He wanted Lu Yuan to use his true strength and defeat him while he was at his full strength. This was equivalent to pushing his aura to its peak and paving the way for his battle with Lai Kongyang. The incomparably massive sword pressure permeated out once again, instantly filling up the entire arena. It was as if an invisible storm was wreaking havoc. Fine ripples appeared on the seals around the arena, as if they had all been attacked at the same time. Lu Yuan's previous nonchalance was swept away. His face was full of seriousness, and his eyes were cold and threatening. I take back what I said before. Lu Yuan said in an unprecedentedly serious tone, "You are very strong. You are qualified to make me use my true strength." Chu Mu faintly smiled and didn't say anything. "However, if it's only my true strength, you are still not qualified to make me use my full strength." The corner of Lu Yuan's mouth twitched as a strange smile appeared on his face. "Next, I will show you the power of the second step of swordsmanship, sword intent." As soon as he finished speaking, an indescribably sharp aura gushed out, as if an invisible sword was going to pierce the sky. Sword intent. It's sword intent. As expected, Lu Yuan has also comprehended sword intent. It seems to be more powerful than Ao Xingyun's. Since Lu Yuan has used sword intent, the outcome is clear. Speaking of which, Chu Mu is also very strong. He forced Lu Yuan to use sword intent. In a few years, his achievements might surpass Lu Yuan's. The people of the Great Kuin Sword Mansion sighed. This scene was unavoidable. Even though they had won 13 matches in a row, which was an unprecedentedly good result, they were still a little unwilling. 5 points of sword intent is indeed very strong. A strange smile appeared on Chu Mu's face. "However, I also have sword intent. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 468. Once Chu Mu's words came out, there was an awkward silence. Even Lu Yuan, who was spewing out his sword intent, paused for a moment. His sword intent was somewhat unstable. After a long while, everyone finally came to their senses. Am I hallucinating? Chu Mu said he also has sword intent? How is that possible? Yeah, sword intent. That's not sword force. Chu Mu wouldn't have been scared silly, right? Obviously, no one believed that Chu Mu also had sword intent. In the entire Eastern sword domain, it was already very rare to have 3 swordsmen who had comprehended sword intent in the Qi realm. It could be said that they were the most outstanding generation in the Eastern sword domain in the past 100 years. No one dared to think about it. Chun Bu-er's eyes, which had been squinting all this time, suddenly widened. A terrifying light shot through the air like cold lightning, leaving a trail of several meters long. On the other hand, Bailey Jiang He and the others widened their eyes and opened their mouths wide. Chu Mu said he also has sword intent. By Li Jiang, his throat was extremely dry, as if he had walked in the desert for 3 days and 3 nights without drinking a drop of water. The elders and the other 9 swordsmen all nodded with difficulty, like dumbfounded geese. Haha, I'm dying of laughter. He actually said he also has sword intent. What does he think sword intent is? A swordsman who was defeated by Chu Mu with 1 sword and was filled with unwillingness, laughed out loud and ridiculed without restraint. There were also people with dignified faces. For example, Ao Xingyan's face was dignified. Lai Kongyang, on the other hand, had an interested and somewhat surprised expression. Faintly, everyone seemed to have heard a rumbling sound, as if a storm was descending and thunder was wreaking havoc. From Chu Mu's vigorous body, a shocking sharpness and aura gushed out and rushed into the sky. It was like a peerless divine sword that could ignore all obstacles. Zhen Tian moved the ground. The sword pressure brought by Lu Yuan was instantly shattered and swept away. Sword, sword, sword. Facts were the best proof. Many people stuttered and pointed at Chu Mu, their fingers trembling. They couldn't say the words sword intent. The sword hero who mocked Chu Mu almost bit his own tongue. His face was full of shock, and then it turned into dejection. Once the sword intent came out, he didn't even have the qualifications to challenge Chu Mu. Not even the slightest bit. They were basically people from 2 different worlds. Elder Long's eyes shone with an incomparably intense light, as if it was going to pierce through the void and land on Chu Mu's body. There was a raging storm in his heart that could not be suppressed and almost rushed out of his chest. Sword intent, and its 5 points. Elder Long muttered in a voice that only he could hear. His tone was filled with unconcealable shock and astonishment. No matter if it's Lai Kongyang, Lu Yuan, or Ao Xingyan, it's indeed surprising that they could comprehend sword intent. But if you think about it carefully, it's not that surprising. After all, their talents are the best in the entire Eastern Sword region, and they've been sword heroes for more than 10 years. They're already in their 30s. And this Chu Mu is only 23 years old this year. To comprehend sword intent at the age of 23, Elder Long didn't dare to continue thinking. It seemed that in the history of the Eastern Sword region that he knew, there had never been a 23-year-old sword hero who had comprehended sword intent in the past 3,000 years. The highest record in the past 3,000 years was a sword hero named Gu Tiancheng, who had comprehended sword intent at the age of 25. However, it was only 1 point of sword intent, and not the 5 points that Chu Mu had displayed. In other words, the time that Chu Mu had to comprehend sword intent had to be pushed back. It might be 1 or 2 years. To comprehend sword intent at the age of 21 or 22, how monstrous was that? This was no longer something that could be described with just 3,000 years. Elder Long was certain that Chu Mu was definitely the first to comprehend sword intent in the past 5,000 years of the Eastern Sword region. a monstrous genius that only appeared once every 5,000 years in the eastern sword region. Elder Long had already decided that once today's battle ended, he would immediately report everything about Chu Mu to the Temple Master. Then he would report it to the 100 Saints Alliance in the central main sword region. Extremely excited, Elder Long's wooden face was filled with excitement. The ancient sword continent had 5 major sword regions. The central sword region was naturally where the 100 Saints Alliance was located, while the 4 major sword regions each had a holy city. They were the holy cities of the East, West, North, South, and East, West, North, and South holy temples. Where there were people, there would be competition. There was also competition between the 5 main sword regions. This competition came from various aspects, and one of them was the geniuses in the respective sword regions. A sword cultivator that could be labeled as a genius by the 100 Saints Alliance was at least at the level of a peerless genius. Before Chu Mu, Lai Kongyang was already a peerless genius. His information had long been reported to the 100 Saints Alliance. In the past 100 years, although there weren't many peerless geniuses in the eastern sword region, Lai Kongyang wasn't the only one. It was just that compared to the southern, western, and northern sword regions, there were a lot less. In the past, when the 100 Saints Alliance gathered, the Eastern Sage Hall would inevitably be ridiculed and even mocked by the southern, northern, and southern sacred palaces. But now there was a Chu Mu. Elder Long was certain that Chu Mu wasn't some peerless genius. He was the kind of genius that stood above the peerless geniuses. Such people had a name, monstrous genius. A monstrous genius would bring more glory to the Eastern Sage Hall than 10 peerless geniuses. If it wasn't for the fact that the battle for karmic luck was extremely important, Elder Long would have already stopped the battle and immediately returned to the Eastern Sage Hall to meet with the Temple Master. In an instant, Lai Kongyang's eyes shone with a terrifying light. Chu Mu, who he didn't put in his eyes from the beginning, had finally aroused some interest in him. Let's see if you can defeat Lu Yuan. Lai Kongyang muttered to himself. Carefully recalling Chu Mu's information, his interest increased by a bit, and he even had a bit of battle intent. However, 50% sword intent. Ao Xingyun's hand gripped the hilt of his sword, trembling slightly. His heart was filled with excitement. It's actually 50% sword intent, 2% higher than mine. Ao Xingyun's sword intent was 30%. Lu Yuan's sword intent was 50%, and the sword intent Chu Mu displayed was also 50%. A sword grandmaster could control the power of the sword force. 1%, 10%, or even 100% could be controlled freely. However, sword intent couldn't. Sword intent was much more mysterious and illusory than sword force. It was already inconceivable for a sword grandmaster to be able to comprehend sword intent, to be able to control the output of sword intent. That was just wishful thinking. In other words, the amount of sword intent one had comprehended would be the amount of sword intent displayed. It couldn't be strengthened or weakened. Therefore, no one doubted whether Chu Mu still had any hidden sword intent. Possessing sword intent was already shocking enough, not to mention that it had reached 50%. I take back what I said just now. You have the qualifications to make me use my full strength, Lu Yuan said excitedly. At the same time, he felt a bit depressed. He had taken back what he said just now, and now he had to take it back again. Even with his temperament, he couldn't help but feel his cheeks heat up. Soon, the trace of embarrassment and depression in his heart disappeared. Holding the sword in his hand tightly, the sword intent that gushed out seemed to be even sharper. It turned into an invisible sword, ignoring the distance between space and time, and directly slashed towards Chu Mu. Sword intent was invisible. Not only was its power many times stronger than sword force, it could also cut through the void. It was rumored that those who possessed sword intent would be invulnerable to all evils and wouldn't be affected by inner demons because sword intent could kill them. Facing the impact of Lu Yuan's sword intent, Chu Mu didn't show any weakness. His sword intent also turned into an invisible sword and slashed towards Lu Yuan. It was a silent collision, and the killing intent was awe-inspiring. The air in the arena was pushed away, and a formless vacuum was formed under the impact of the sword intent. In the next breath, a large amount of air flowed backwards, like 100 rivers flowing into the sea. There was a loud explosion, and the momentum was horrifying. 50% sword intent, no difference in strength. Lu Yuan and Chu Mu's robes fluttered in the wind, as if they were going to be blown away by the wind. "Take my sword," Lu Yuan growled. The impact of the sword intent was only to pave the way for his sword skill. Endless golden light shot out from the sword in Lu Yuan's hand, shooting into the sky. The entire arena seemed to have turned into a golden ocean. Even the audience who were far away could feel the sharpness of the golden light that filled the arena. It was as if their bodies were going to be pierced through. It contained 100% of the piercing mentality. In the blink of an eye, the golden light that filled the arena shrank and turned into sword lights that were 1/2 meter long and as thick as a finger. They hovered around Lu Yuan and coiled around him as if they were protecting his swords. There were a total of 10 golden sword lights. Lu Yuan held the long sword in his hand with a serious look on his face. The chi around him was fluctuating violently. It seemed like performing this attack was a burden on him. Chu Mu's pupils shrank. From the 10 golden sword lights, Chu Mu could feel the sharpness. Each of the sword lights was formed by the peak of Chi Hai's gold element, sword chi. Not only did it contain 100% of the piercing mentality, it also contained 5% of the sword intent. It was extremely powerful, and was at least a few times more powerful than the sky-shattering sword attack. From this, it could be seen that there was a huge difference in power between sword artists who didn't understand the sword intent. This attack, could it be the new sword skill that Lu Yuan was talking about? The Hidden Dragon Sword Palace's Wang Palace leader thought to himself with his eyes wide open. Lai Kongyang also showed an interested expression. They could all feel the power of this sword skill. At the same time, there were only a few people who could see the flaws of this sword skill. Chu Mu, I will remember your name, because you will be the first person to make me perform this new sword skill. At the same time, you will also be the first person to be defeated by this new sword skill. Lu Yuan's voice was extremely low, and it sounded like the clanging of metal. His eyes shone with a golden light that could pierce through steel. Remember, my new sword technique is the first form of the heaven-sundering sword technique. 10 blades. 10 blades! Chu Mu repeated in a low voice. He looked at the 10 golden sword lights around Lu Yuan and nodded. This name was very normal, but it was quite appropriate. If that's the case, then let me see the power of these 10 blades. As you wish. Lu Yuan's voice was even lower. He couldn't hold on for too long. As he waved his long sword, it was as if there was an invisible mountain pressing down on his sword. Lu Yuan's movements were very slow and strenuous. In the next moment, as Lu Yuan waved his long sword, a golden sword light broke through the air and shot towards Chu Mu. Immediately after, a second golden sword light shot out. The third beam, the fourth beam, the fifth beam. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qijin. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 469. The golden radiance rapidly enlarged in front of his eyes as Chu Mu slashed out with his sword. A clanging sound rang out and sparks flew. The golden radiance was shattered by Chu Mu's sword. Chu Mu felt the demon-slaying sword vibrate violently and almost flew out of his hand. The second golden radiance broke through the air and almost connected with the first golden radiance. Chu Mu had no choice but to use the flying swan illusory sky steps to dodge. The third, fourth, and fifth golden radiance flew over in an extremely dangerous manner. Under the flying swan, illusory sky steps. Chu Mu's figure flew like a spirit in the clouds. The golden radiance tore through Chu Mu's protective sword chi and almost flew past his body. Chu Mu could feel the threatening sharpness of the golden radiance. It was as if it was going to pierce through his body, causing his hair to stand on end. The golden radiance missed and paused in midair. It was as if they were pulled by an invisible rope and changed their direction, once again shooting towards Chu Mu. Landing on the ground, he swung the demon-slaying sword, and 5 sword shadows broke through the air. It was as if Chu Mu had swung 5 swords at the same time, breaking apart the 5 sword radiance. Chu Mu only felt that his palm was being violently shaken, as if it was going to split open. It was extremely painful. One had to know that after he had cultivated the first level of the heavenly desolate sword physique, all aspects of his body had improved by at least 10 times. Furthermore, he had used the force dissipation technique to dissipate most of the force. Under such circumstances, he still felt that his palm was about to split open. This was enough to show how powerful the golden radiance was. Lu Yuan's face was solemn. His eyes flashed with a strong golden radiance as he controlled the 5 golden radiance to attack Chu Mu from afar. The 5 golden rays were even more nimble than fish in the water. They changed unpredictably and went straight for Chu Mu. They came from every angle, splitting and splitting. Sometimes they formed a straight line to attack Chu Mu, while other times they attacked Chu Mu from 5 different angles. Lu Yuan's control over the 5 golden rays was extremely high, but at the same time it was very taxing on his mind. The other 5 rays of golden light hovered around Lu Yuan, protecting him like loyal guards. Everyone could see that Lu Yuan still had some strength left. The 5 rays of golden light had already forced Chu Mu into a difficult situation. If all 10 rays of golden light were released, they would definitely be able to defeat Chu Mu. No one realized that their thoughts had changed. Originally, they thought that Chu Mu wouldn't be a match for Lu Yuan's sword. But now, they thought that Lu Yuan would have to go all out in order to defeat Chu Mu. Chu Mu once again deflected the 5 golden rays that shot towards him at almost the same time. Now that he had grasped the pattern, he didn't suffer much of an impact this time. Very powerful, at least 3 times stronger than the stone-shaking wave sword. Unfortunately, this sword technique has too many flaws. After a few exchanges, Chu Mu could see the flaws of the 10 blades. If it's perfected, its power can be increased by at least 10 times. If its power was increased by another 10 times, then Chu Mu would definitely lose this time. Unfortunately, there were no ifs. A true sword skill was a framework that required various components. Sword chi, concept, and sword force were all indispensable. Apart from sword chi, concept, and sword force were all on the same level of power. As for sword chi, from a certain perspective, it should be on the same level as the mentality and sword aura. If it was higher than the mentality and sword aura, then it would be even better. If it was lower than the mentality and sword aura, then it would affect the true power of the sword technique. For example, once a sword artist reached the Chi-High realm, he would naturally be able to understand the mentality and sword aura. It was like an accessory. Therefore, the sword technique created based on the mentality and sword aura would need to be at the Chi-High realm to be able to release its full power. Of course, if one used the sword aura of the astral realm to activate the sword technique, then its power would increase by a few folds. However, the sword aura was much more powerful than the sword chi. It would not be able to achieve a balance with the sword aura and sword aura. In the end, it would destroy the integrity of the sword technique and make it less smooth. With the same logic, the 10 blades was a powerful sword technique created based on the sword aura. It needed to be at the same level as the sword aura in order to be able to achieve a balance. Naturally, that would be the sword aura and the mentality. When one reached the astral realm, the sword chi would turn into sword aura. When the mentality reached the completion stage, it would reach a higher level called profound. In other words, for the 10 blades sword technique to be complete, it would need to be a combination of sword aura, profound, and sword intent. Right now, the 10 blades was only a combination of 5% sword aura, and mentality. It was also a combination that was forcefully combined. There was no technique to speak of. In other words, it could not be considered a sword technique. It was just an outline of a sword technique that was forcefully combined. Even so, this sword technique's embryonic form had 3 times the power of the stone-shaking wave sword. And this was under the condition that the 5% sword aura had not been fully utilized. Lu Yuan should know this as well, but he had no way to solve it right now. The mentality was easier to comprehend than the sword aura. Therefore, many sword artists who had comprehended the mentality could not comprehend the sword aura. However, the profound and sword intent were different. After reaching the peak of the sword aura, as long as one had enough talent and some luck, it was not impossible to comprehend the sword intent. As for the profound, there was a strict rule that one had to reach the 9th transformation realm first. Every time a swordsman made a breakthrough in his cultivation, it was a metamorphosis from his spirit to his body. Every metamorphosis was a sublimation of his life essence. Comprehending the sword intent required a strong perception. Although comprehending the profound was partially dependent on talent, it still required a sublimation of one's life essence. The 9th transformation realm was the starting point for comprehending the profound. Before reaching the 9th transformation realm, no matter who it was, no matter how monstrous, they would not be able to comprehend the profound. This was the iron rule. Otherwise, like Kong Yang and the others who had comprehended the mentality to completion would have already comprehended the profound. Chu Mu kept dodging and shattering the 5 golden lights, absorbing the pitiful advantages within them for his own use. Seeing that the 5 golden lights could not do anything to Chu Mu, Lu Yuan clenched his teeth and waved his long sword. The other 5 golden lights around him trembled and shot out one after another. Using all of his strength, Lu Yuan's forehead was covered in sweat. His face was pale, and he clenched his teeth as if he was under great pressure. Under Lu Yuan's control, the 10 golden streaks connected and shot into the sky. Like a dragon swimming in a circle, their speed was extremely fast. They circled around Lu Yuan's back and floated above Lu Yuan, locking onto Chu Mu like a dragon emerging from the water. Chu Mu, take my strongest move. Lu Yuan roared. The veins on the back of his hand that was holding the sword were bulging. Even his palm was trembling. He waved his long sword, and the golden sword light shot towards Chu Mu with a terrifying sound. The air was pushed apart, and countless ripples were created. Lu Yuan, since you've used all of your strength, I can't hold back either. This move is a new sword skill that I've created recently. It's a sword skill that hasn't been completed yet, Chu Mu said seriously. The monster-slaying sword was suddenly covered in a layer of dark golden light. When everyone heard Chu Mu's words, they immediately straightened up, even though their bodies were already as straight as swords that pierce the sky. Although this sword skill hasn't been completed yet, I've already given it a name. It's called Moon Slashing. As soon as he finished speaking, the monster-slaying sword slashed forward. A dark, golden crescent moon sword energy that was only a few meters long tore through the air and slashed forward. It looked very similar to the seismic wave sword, but it was much smaller, only a few meters long. However, the power it contained was more than 10 times that of the seismic wave sword. Moon Slashing. This was the result of Chu Mu's sudden inspiration after comprehending the sword intent. It was also a brand new sword skill that was created through a special combination of sword intent, sword chi, mentality, and the seismic wave. This combination was different from Lu Yuan's forced combination. It was a combination that went with the flow. Therefore, it was more powerful than Lu Yuan's 10 blades. To be able to do this, one reason was due to Chu Mu's extremely powerful soul and comprehension ability. The other reason was due to the immense power of providence that he had. If not for the immense power of providence, Chu Mu would have needed at least a few months to reach this stage. There was a clear difference between an incomplete sword skill and a sword skill prototype. Now was the time to test the power of Chu Mu's incomplete sword skill. The dark golden crescent moon, sword energy, was unbelievably powerful. The air in front of it was first compressed and then torn apart, forming terrifying ripples that spread out. The power of each ripple was at the level of the seismic wave sword. Everyone's eyes were attracted by the dark golden crescent moon. In front of them, the world disappeared and fell into darkness. The dark golden crescent moon was like the only light, cutting through the dark sky and descending with destruction. The dark golden crescent moon collided with the golden light. Everyone felt as if there was a teeth-numbing crunch in their ears, as if a knife was slashing across glass. Lu Yuan's eyes widened, his eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. He saw with his own eyes that the first ray of golden light was sliced apart by the dark golden crescent, followed by the second and third rays of golden light in less than a blink of an eye. Unable to block it, Lu Yuan could only watch as the 10 golden lights were cut in less than 1/100th of a second by the dark golden crescent moon. The dark golden crescent moon shrunk to half its original size and slashed towards Lu Yuan. Fast, too fast, and there was no way to dodge. Lu Yuan instinctively felt fear, the fear of death. He felt as if his throat was being choked and he couldn't breathe. He had already used all his strength to perform the 10 blades. The power of the crescent moon was too terrifying. The aura that locked onto him made it difficult for Lu Yuan to move. In the next breath, Lu Yuan would be slashed by the dark golden crescent moon. With the power of the crescent moon, one could imagine that even if Lu Yuan had an extreme great armor, he wouldn't be able to escape death. Lu Yuan knew this as well. He tried his best to dodge, but at this moment his body didn't listen to him at all. The faces of the people from the hidden dragon sword palace changed drastically. The dark golden crescent moon was too fast, and they didn't even have time to save him. In the blink of an eye, the moment the dark golden crescent moon broke through Lu Yuan's protective sword chi, a sword light fell from the sky. With a pop, the dark golden crescent moon was shattered by the sword light, turning into countless dark golden light spots. Due to the inertia, they flew towards Lu Yuan and brushed past him, causing his black hair to dance wildly in the wind. Lu Yuan stood rooted to the ground as if he was scared out of his wits. Chu Mu's face flashed with shock. Although the crescent moon was an incomplete sword skill, he knew how powerful it was. It was actually shattered by a sword light, and that sword light came from the sky. In other words, the one who made the move was Elder Long, to be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 470. Cutting Moon. This incomplete sword technique was displayed before everyone for the first time. After swallowing Lu Yuan's luck, Chu Mu's luck dragon increased significantly. It circled around his body, looking as lifelike as a true dragon. Lu Yuan, who managed to survive, still looked somewhat pale. He looked deeply at Chu Mu before looking at Lai Kongyang. Then, he left the sword arena without saying anything. The following battles were on a completely different level from the battle between Chu Mu and Lu Yuan. The two sides did not seem to be interested in the battles. The spectators were still immersed in the battle between Chu Mu and Lu Yuan, so the battles ended somewhat hastily. At night, Chu Mu cultivated quietly in his room, reflecting on his battle with Lu Yuan, reflecting on his shortcomings, comprehending his sword intent, state, and so on. When the day arrived, Chu Mu ended his night of cultivation. As he wished, his state of tearing had reached perfection. Chu Mu could feel that the perfected state of tearing was different from before. It was smoother and more natural. It was like a machine that had become complete and precise. Its might had clearly increased significantly. According to the previous rules, you should be fighting with Ao Xingyun in today's battle. Although Ao Xingyun is not as strong as Lai Kongyang, he is still very strong. You have to be careful, Bailey Jiang said seriously. The group arrived at the Heavenly Judgment Sword Arena. The 15th day's battle for luck started again. Perhaps due to yesterday's battles, Elder Long made some adjustments to today's battles. The first 48 battles had nothing to do with Chu Mu, Lai Kongyang, Lu Yuan, or Ao Xingyun. Everyone guessed that the battle between the four of them would be the finale. This was the only way to bring this year's battle for luck to a perfect end. The battles continued one after another. The other 9 sword heroes of the Great Kuin sword residence seemed to be on steroids. They fought bravely. Finally, the 48 battles ended. Without any rest, Elder Long announced the 49th battle of the day. Chu Mu versus Ao Xingyun. One line sky. Startling heavenly sword. As soon as he attacked, Ao Xingyun released 30% of his sword intent and used his strongest sword skill, hoping to defeat Chu Mu. Ao Xingyun had watched the battle between Chu Mu and Lu Yuan very carefully. Although the difference between 5 and 3-part sword intent wasn't the only deciding factor, the difference was still quite obvious. Ao Xingyun was deep in thought for the entire night. He replaced Lu Yuan and Chu Mu as his imaginary enemy. He fought again and again, but he always lost. Therefore, Ao Xingyun was holding on to a sliver of hope as he attacked with all his might. Under the influence of 30% sword intent, the power of the one line of sky and the heaven-startling sword reached its peak. One line sky and heaven-startling sword were Ao Xingyun's signature sword skills. Especially heaven-startling sword, it was his ultimate move. However, although the one line of sky was supported by sword intent, it was more than 10 times cruder than the 10 blades. It was only twice as powerful as the seismic wave sword. As for the heaven-startling sword, it was very close to the embryonic form of sword intent. It was nearly 3 times stronger than the seismic wave sword. As if he understood that these 2 sword skills couldn't do anything to Chu Mu, Ao Xingyun used a secret technique. With a boom, an incomparably dense sword chi burst out and soared into the sky. The aura it emitted was 30% more powerful. His black hair danced crazily as it soared into the sky. It seemed that even the 30% sword intent had increased a lot. His eyes flashed with a strong purple light as electric arcs covered his body. Crackling sounds could be heard as his aura filled the entire arena. Then Ao Xingyun attacked again. It was still the one line of sky and the heaven-startling sword, but its power was 30% more powerful. After attacking, Ao Xingyun's berserk aura relaxed. This was his strongest move. He had even used a secret technique to temporarily increase his strength. If he still couldn't do anything to Chu Mu, then there was no need to continue the battle. He estimated that he would have another battle soon. That battle would be even more important. He couldn't lose sight of one thing. Without using the moon-slashing sword, Chu Mu's combination of the seismic wave sword plus the sky-splitting sword and the flying swan illusory steps made Ao Xingyun's sword skills ineffective. I admit defeat. Ao Xingyun was very straightforward. After swallowing Ao Xingyun's power of fortune, Chu Mu's dragon of fortune exceeded 40 feet. Next was the 50th battle, Lai Kongyang versus Lu Yuan. The difference between the 10% sword intent and the 50% sword intent was even more obvious. Moreover, Lai Kongyang's accumulation was deeper than Lu Yuan's, and his talent was even higher. Soon, Lu Yuan was defeated. However, Lu Yuan's 10 blades also forced Lai Kongyang to use an incomplete sword skill based on his sword intent. Lai Kongyang's dragon of fortune also exceeded 40 feet, which was much longer than Chu Mu's. Tomorrow, the final battle, Elder Long said as his figure flashed and disappeared. The ripping mentality had already reached perfection. Chu Mu spent some time to comprehend Lai Kongyang's incomplete sword skill. In terms of power, it was very powerful. Under the influence of the 10% sword intent, it was far more powerful than the moon's slashing sword. Of course, if he used the 10% sword intent to drive the moon's slashing sword, its power would not be inferior. He spent another half of the time comprehending the sword intent, and the last half comprehending the cloud mentality. Compared to comprehending the ripping concept, the difficulty of comprehending the concept of cloud was much lower. It was much simpler. When the sun rose, Lin Ming's concept of cloud had reached 100% perfection. This rocket-like speed of comprehension made Chu Mu deeply addicted. Unfortunately, after today, he wouldn't have the chance to do so again. Chu Mu, today is the last day of the battle for fortune. Your real opponent is Lai Kongyang. On the way to the heaven-deciding sword field, Bailey Jiang, he spoke with an unconcealable excitement. Lai Kongyang is very powerful. He is worthy of the title of sword hero. You just have to do your best. That's right. Chu Mu, you're still very young. Lai Kongyang is 10 years older than you, and he's an absolute genius. Losing to him isn't a big deal. Just treat the fight with him as a chance to temper yourself. The elders all spoke up to advise him, meaning that they had already determined that Chu Mu wasn't Lai Kongyang's opponent. Chu Mu nodded. He didn't explain or guarantee anything. He didn't know how strong Lai Kongyang was, and he didn't care if he won or lost in the end. He only cared about whether Lai Kongyang could force him to use his full power. Maybe he could, maybe he couldn't. He would only know in the end. Early in the morning, the heaven-deciding sword field was filled with people, and there were many discussions. Today's battle was much simpler than before. There were only 2 battles. However, these 2 battles were the most anticipated. Elder Long didn't purposely stir up the crowd's appetite. Once he arrived and the discussions quieted down, he announced the start of today's battle. First battle, Heaven-shocking sword hero Ao Xingyun versus heaven-breaking sword hero Lu Yuan. Everyone knew that this battle was for the 3rd place because the 2 of them had already been defeated by Chu Mu and Lai Kongyang. They had no fate with the 2nd and 1st place. The top 3 had a chance to enter the East Sage Hall to cultivate. The 3rd place was very important. On the sword battle arena, Lu Yuan and Ao Xingyun faced each other. The 2 of them were ranked 2nd and 3rd. However, from now on, they should be ranked 3rd and 4th because the super dark horse Chu Mu had caught up and surpassed them. 3-part sword intent and 5-part sword intent soared into the sky. At this time, they had to use their strength from the start to avoid being defeated because of their own carelessness. Even though they had seen each other's battle before, they still tried to attack each other a few times before using their full power. The difference in strength between Lu Yuan and Ao Xingyun wasn't very big. After both of them used their full strength, it was like a fierce battle between dragons and tigers. On the sword battle arena, sword light splashed and countless sparks flew. The 2 figures collided, and one could only vaguely see 2 blurry sword lights flickering. Close combat, sword technique, long-range sword technique. With a boom, Ao Xingyun used his secret technique again, and his strength increased by 30%. A line of sky and heaven-shocking sword were used again and again. Streaks of purple light swept across the sword battle arena. Lu Yuan should also have a secret technique to temporarily increase his strength, but he didn't use it. Instead, he used the first move of the heaven-breaking sword art, 10 blades. Of course, Lu Yuan also had a secret technique to temporarily increase his strength, but this kind of secret technique had side effects. Moreover, it was very taxing on the body. Under the circumstances of using the secret technique to increase his strength, he didn't have the confidence to use the 10 blades. Choosing between the 2, he used the 10 blades sword technique. 5 golden lights flew across the sky. Ao Xingyun had no choice but to use the line of sky to knock them away. As if realizing that only 5 golden lights couldn't do anything to Ao Xingyun, Lu Yuan used the other 5 golden lights. After the battle with Chu Mu and Lai Kongyang, his control of the 10 blades had become more precise. Although the power didn't increase, it was more flexible. Chu Mu, what do you think? Ao Xingyun is still not Lu Yuan's opponent, Chu Mu said lightly. The situation was very obvious. Since Lu Yuan used the 10 blades, Ao Xingyun didn't have a chance to get close to Lu Yuan. He could only passively dodge and defend. Unless Ao Xingyun had a sword technique similar to the moon-slashing sword, he couldn't do anything to Lu Yuan with just the line of sky and heaven's shocking sword. In the end, he would only be defeated. In order to compete for the 3rd place, Ao Xingyun used all his strength. His hair was disheveled and his eyes were red. He looked like he was fighting a bloody battle. Unfortunately, he lost because of the difference in strength in the end. The exciting battle had ended, but the hearts of the millions of spectators were instantly raised because the most exciting battle was about to begin. Sky-burning Sword Master Lai Kongyang versus Zhen Tian, Sword Master Chu Mu. One was a veteran sword master, the king of sword masters, and the other was a new sword master, a super dark horse. What kind of sparks would be created between them? I'm very surprised that my final opponent is you. Lai Kongyang's lips curled into a faint smile as he looked at Chu Mu and spoke neither quickly nor slowly. Even if you lose to my sword, I won't be surprised, Chu Mu replied. Good spirit. Lai Kongyang didn't get angry. He just smiled. In his opinion, Chu Mu's words were just to raise his aura. Among the sword masters, there was no one who could defeat him. With a boom, Lai Kongyang's sword intent rushed to the sky. He didn't hold back at all. Then, with another boom, Chu Mu's sword intent also rushed to the sky. 10%. Countless people were shocked. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 471. 10% Sword Intent. Lai Kongyang's expression froze as he repeated it in a low voice. His expression immediately changed as his pupils shrank to the size of needles. This was because he remembered that Chu Mu had used 5% sword intent against Lu Yuan and Ao Xingyun. In just one night, Chu Mu's sword intent had increased from 5% to 10%? No, it was definitely impossible. Lai Kongyang knew very well how difficult it was to comprehend the sword intent, especially for sword artists like him who had comprehended the sword intent in the Qi-Hai realm. The difficulty was 10 times higher. The reason why Lai Kongyang was able to comprehend the sword intent and reach 10% was because of his extreme talent, his 3 years of continuous hard work, and the last reason was because of the huge amount of luck he had right now. Before receiving the huge amount of luck, his sword intent had only reached 9%. After half a month, it had increased again and reached 10%, making it even more powerful. It should be known that the luck he had received was even more powerful than Chu Mu's. Even if Chu Mu's comprehension was higher than his, it was already not bad for him to be able to increase his sword intent by 1% in half a month. How could he increase it by 5% in one night? After eliminating this possibility, Lai Kongyang could only think of another shocking fact. Chu Mu could control the strength of his sword intent at will. Lai Kongyang almost exclaimed that this was impossible. Sword intent was much more powerful than sword aura and was much more illusory. Even most of the true realm sword artists could not control the strength of their sword intent at will. How could a mere Qi-Hai sword artist do it? This was not only what Lai Kongyang was thinking, but it was also what countless people present, including Elder Long, the sword of Gojoseon, were thinking. Elder Long looked at Chu Mu, and the more he looked, the more satisfied he was. He had already reported Chu Mu's information, but he did not expect that Chu Mu would exceed his expectations again. 10% sword intent. Chu Mu, this guy really surprises me time and time again. Bailey Jiang, he gasped for breath. His voice was filled with excitement and depression, and his face was flushed because of excitement. Ha ha ha. I admit that you have surprised me once again. You are qualified to make me use my true strength. Lai Kongyang suddenly roared with laughter, and his heroic spirit shot into the sky. He'd completely changed his casual and carefree appearance from before, and his battle intent mixed with sword insight shot into the sky, causing the wind and clouds to surge and shake the heavens and the earth. This was the true Lai Kongyang, the burning heaven's sword hero. The previous him was just a disguise because he didn't have a strong enough opponent. The vast and boundless aura impacted the entire battle arena, but it was blocked by the seal. Because it was too powerful, it caused layers of ripples to spread out on the seal. Just the aura alone was able to achieve such an effect that other sword grandmasters would have to use their full strength to display their sword skills. It was extremely shocking. Chu Mu, who bore the brunt of the attack, did not move at all. Only his black hair and robes fluttered in the wind. There seemed to be a dark, golden flame springing up in his eyes, rapidly growing larger and burning fiercely. Lai Kongyang's powerful aura finally aroused Chu Mu's raging fighting spirit. His sword intent seemed to have received a boost as it became even stronger and sharper. The two seemed to have a tacit understanding as they pulled out their swords at the same time. A dazzling red light shot through the air, condensing into a phoenix phantom that spread its wings and soared high into the sky. The terrifying heat wreaked havoc, and the temperature of the battle arena rose rapidly. In a breath's time, it had already reached over 1,000 degrees. Ordinary swordsmen would immediately die from dehydration if they stayed in the arena. A clear cry seemed to rush out of the heavenly dueling arena and resounded across the horizon. The huge phoenix phantom flapped its wings, causing a flaming storm that covered the sky, and then rushed towards Chu Mu. Dozens of meters away, Chu Mu could clearly feel the terrifying heat that was about to burn him to ashes. It was like a huge wave that was crazily surging towards him. Vaguely, Chu Mu seemed to smell something burning. Burning phoenix break. The incomplete sword skill of the burning heaven sword hero Lai Kongyang, and also the one that defeated Lu Yuan. It was a powerful sword skill based on 10% of sword intent. The heaven and earth seemed to be burned by the phoenix phantom. There was no place that wasn't scorching hot, and it could instantly melt steel. Then, the sky suddenly darkened, as if it had lost all light sources. Even the huge phoenix phantom was swallowed by the darkness. A dark golden light cut through the darkness, piercing through the sky, and a crescent moon rose. In an instant, the moon-slaying sword and the burning phoenix break collided. A mournful cry resounded through the heavenly dueling arena. The millions of spectators all covered their ears, and their faces were filled with pain. The sound was too sharp, and it was like a demon's voice piercing through the brain. The flames on the phoenix's body suddenly expanded, contracted, expanded again, and exploded with a boom. Countless flame shock waves as thick as an arm wreaked havoc, carrying bits of broken dark gold, instantly covering the entire battle arena. The battle arena seemed to have turned into a sea of flames. The phoenix phantom disappeared, and so did the moon-slaying sword. The power of the two incomplete sword skills was about the same. Lai Kongyang and Chu Mu stood on the battle arena, allowing the flame shock waves as thick as an arm to hit their bodies. Their feet did not move at all. The flame shock waves mixed with broken dark gold hit their protective sword chi and tore it apart in a few hits. They waved their long swords, and sword shadows appeared one after another, shattering countless flames. Some of the flames hit the seal of the battle arena, and immediately countless clear ripples appeared. The power of each flame shockwave was above the stone-shaking wave sword. With a whoosh, Lai Kongyang broke through the flame shockwaves and rushed towards Chu Mu, thrusting his sword forward. This sword was too sudden, too fast and unexpected. Chu Mu did not even have time to think before his sword was already thrusting towards his face. He instinctively leaned to the side, and the sharp sword wind swept past his ear. Chu Mu felt a tearing pain as if his ear was cut off, and a few strands of hair flew in the air. Attacking with his sword had long since become an instinct in Chu Mu's countless training sessions. Before Lai Kongyang could attack a second time, a sword light that seemed to come from nowhere appeared in front of his eyes, sweeping upwards. He quickly dodged, and only a slight sound could be heard. Lai Kongyang's sleeve fluttered like a butterfly. Sword, 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 and sword. There was no time to think at all. He was almost instinctively thrusting his sword, dodging his sword, and blocking his sword. Since he could not win with sword skills, Lai Kongyang chose to fight with sword skills in close combat. This sword skill was a basic sword skill and not some ancient sword skill. Sword masters like them deeply understood the importance of walking their own path. They had long since abandoned the useless ancient sword skills and only used the sword skills and basic sword skills that they had comprehended to fight their enemies. Although it was a basic sword skill, it contained a pure and dense sword chi and sword intent. The power of each sword was extremely terrifying, and because of the sword intent, the power of each sword was not below the stone-shaking wave sword. Its lethality was shocking. The protective sword chi of both sides was useless, as if it was just an illusion, and was instantly torn apart. The armor on their bodies did not even have the time to activate a protective shield, and even if it was activated, it would not be able to block such a sword attack. The battle between Chu Mu and Lai Kongyang was several times more dangerous than the battle between Chu Mu and Lu Yuan, because Lai Kongyang's sword skills were much more profound than Lu Yuan's. The two of them did not use any movement techniques, and only dodged with their instincts trained from life and death situations. It seemed like there were traces to follow, but in reality, it was impossible to predict where they would move next. Everything was adjusted according to the sword. Sword light flashed and sword shadows flashed. The two swords became extremely blurry. The two figures moved at high speed, but did not leave. Instead, they entangled with each other and continuously counterattacked as they dodged. The sounds of splattering rang out continuously. Every sound was extremely sharp, and it spread out of the arena and into the ears of every spectator, causing their scalps to go numb and goosebumps to rise. The two swords collided, and blazing sparks flew into the sky. Everyone stared with their eyes wide open and forgot to breathe. The entire arena was deathly silent. So this is his true strength. Lu Yuan stared with his eyes wide open, and his hands clenched into fists. He felt the blood in his body boil, but it immediately cooled down as if cold water had been poured over it. He felt a little depressed. With such sword skills, Chu Mu would have been able to completely defeat him in the previous battle. Chu Mu did not know about Lu Yuan's depression. He gradually recovered, and his powerful soul allowed him to replace his instincts and regain control of his body. Lai Kongyang's sword style was very ordinary at the beginning, but it was very fast. Moreover, it was refined and simple, and there were no superfluous movements. Then it slowly changed and became a sword technique with extremely terrifying explosive power. With a stab, wind and thunder would explode, accompanied by a terrifyingly high temperature that wreaked havoc in the surroundings. Although the speed was reduced, the momentum was great, and the power was even stronger. After regaining control of his body, his powerful soul, and his many years of training in sword skills allowed Chu Mu to gradually feel the trajectory of Lai Kongyang's sword. However, each of Lai Kongyang's sword gave him a huge pressure, and under this pressure, Chu Mu gradually entered an ethereal state. It was as if the entire world had disappeared, and there was only a sword light in front of him like a bolt of lightning. Chu Mu suddenly stopped moving, and his entire body seemed to be rooted to the ground. Only the monster-slaying sword continued to swing out, stabbing, slicing, chopping, slashing, and lifting. All kinds of basic sword moves were perfectly displayed, and the speed was getting faster and faster. Lai Kongyang suddenly realized that he was gradually being suppressed, even though he was about to gain the upper hand in the battle. The speed of his opponent's sword was getting faster and faster, and although the power of the sword did not increase, the increasing speed of the sword was starting to tire him out. He was slowly beginning to understand how Lu Yuan felt back then. Lai Kongyang even realized that he felt like he was in a quagmire, and his sword skills were starting to lose. He wanted to escape, but he realized that every time he showed signs of escaping, Chu Mu's sword would immediately stab at him from an unbelievable angle, making it impossible for him to retreat. He had no choice but to respond. This feeling was as if he was being forced by Chu Mu to cultivate his sword skills. Thinking of this, Lai Kongyang's heart surged with anger for no reason. As the king of sword heroes, he was being forced to become someone else's practice target. What kind of contempt was this? His anger exploded, and a boom sounded from Lai Kongyang's body, and a terrifying aura exploded. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 472. Boom! A loud explosion shook the heavens. Terrifying flames suddenly gushed out from Lai Kongyang's body, and the surrounding temperature instantly rose to a few thousand degrees. Chu Mu could feel the terrifying heat as if he was going to melt. In the blink of an eye, his body was sweating profusely, and it all evaporated under the terrifying heat. The white robe on his body almost caught fire. If he hadn't used his sword aura to block the flames and retreated quickly, he would have been in a sorry state. His swordsmanship wasn't as good as Chu Mu's, so Lai Kongyang had no choice but to use this move to force Chu Mu to retreat. With a whoosh, Chu Mu distanced himself from Lai Kongyang and appeared a few dozen meters away. He looked at Lai Kongyang with a solemn expression. The crimson flames burned fiercely, and Lai Kongyang was enveloped by the flames. He was like a fiery demon that was bathed in flames as he wantonly emitted a terrifying heat that could melt steel instantly. The surrounding air was distorted, and Lai Kongyang looked unreal. Trio of burning heavens. The palace master of the Great Qian sword residence let out a sigh of relief and had an expression of disbelief on his face. Chu Mu actually forced Kongyang to use his trump card. The trio of burning heavens was Lai Kongyang's trump card. It was the most powerful secret technique that he possessed. At the same time, it was also the reason why he was called the Burning Heavens Sword Hero. As the name suggested, the trio of burning heavens had 3 levels. It was a fire-type secret technique. The first level could increase the power of the fire type by 30%, the second level by 60%, and the third level by 100%. Moreover, this secret technique had a special characteristic. When it was used at the first level, it would cause a huge burden on the body, and there would be side effects later on. However, when it was used at the second level, the burden and side effects would be halved. When it was used at the third level, the burden and side effects would be halved again. In other words, the trio of burning heavens was a secret technique that would increase the power of the technique and reduce the side effects as it was cultivated to a higher level. It was extremely precious. Now, Lai Kongyang was using the first level of the trio of burning heavens, red flames burning heavens. Lai Kongyang specialized in the fire element. Although his fire concept hadn't mutated, it had already reached the perfection level. His usage of fire concept was much better than other sword heroes. Now, under the amplification of the Burning Heaven trio, its power had increased by 30%, making it even more terrifying. Within the red flames, Lai Kongyang's eyes were also burning fiercely. He had his own considerations as to why he had chosen the Burning Heaven trio as his trump card. Chu Mu was really strong. There was no doubt about that. Although Chu Mu's sword aura was only at the late stage of the Qi High realm, and the difference between him and the peak of the late stage of the Qi High realm was very obvious. After the exchange, Lai Kongyang discovered that Chu Mu's sword aura's density and purity was not much inferior to his own. Lai Kongyang had cultivated an earth-level upper-rank sword Qi art, and had been refined by many people over and over again. From this point, it meant that Chu Mu's sword chi art was of a higher quality than his. It was very likely to be a top-rank Earth-level sword chi art. That sword chi was even weirder. It contained a corrosive power that could corrode his sword chi to a certain extent and weaken its power. Because of all these factors, his advantage in terms of sword chi cultivation was reduced to almost nothing. Sword chi? He had 10% sword chi, and so did Chu Mu. Sword skill? He had the incomplete Burning Phoenix Break, which was based on sword chi. Chu Mu also had the incomplete Cutting Moon Sword, which was based on sword chi. Sword skill? His swordsmanship was indeed profound and powerful. However, Chu Mu's swordsmanship was even more profound and powerful than his. It was unimaginable. Even Lai Kongyang himself couldn't imagine how there could be such a person in the world. Such a monstrous genius that made him lose all his advantages. He was only 23 years old. Lai Kongyang couldn't help but think back to when he was 23 years old, when he had just received the title of Sword Hero. Although he was quite powerful back then, compared to the current Chu Mu, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. He thought back to how he had looked down on Chu Mu and thought that he was just a young man with decent strength. Who would have thought that the current situation would be like this? It wasn't that Lai Kongyang wasn't powerful. Just seeing how easily he had defeated Lu Yuan and Ao Xingyun, and how the other sword heroes didn't even have the courage to attack, was enough to show how terrifying he was. Lai Kongyang was powerful, but so was Chu Mu. In fact, Chu Mu was even more powerful. In the end, Chu Mu had forced Lai Kongyang to unleash his full strength and use his secret technique. Lai Kongyang was a proud person. After being crowned the king of sword heroes, he became even more proud. Therefore, he wouldn't allow anyone to defeat him, especially a young swordsman who was younger than him by more than 10 years. This was no longer a fight for the first place in the Battle of Providence. It was a fight for the king of sword heroes in the Eastern Sword region. Lai Kongyang wouldn't allow this title, which had been on his head for many years, to be taken away by someone else. He had to win, and he had to win beautifully. Thinking of this, Lai Kongyang clenched his teeth and the scarlet flames in his eyes started to change. Gradually, a tinge of green started to spread. When the flames in his eyes turned completely green, the blazing red flames on his body also began to change. Traces of green appeared, and as time passed, more and more of the green color appeared. It seemed like a long time, but in fact, Lai Kongyang had already made his decision in just a few breaths' time. Moreover, most of the flames on his body had turned green. The Sword Mansion master of the Great Qian Sword Mansion was stunned. Then his face turned solemn. He didn't expect Lai Kongyang to not only perform the Burning Heavens Trio, but also perform the second stage. It seemed like Chu Mu was giving him a lot of pressure. The second stage of the Burning Heavens Trio was naturally much more powerful than the first stage. At the same time, the burden and side effects on the body were also smaller. However, it had a disadvantage, which was that it consumed a lot of energy. In other words, Lai Kongyang couldn't sustain the consumption of the second stage of the Burning Heavens Trio for a long time. He didn't have much time left. After 3 breaths' time, the flames on Lai Kongyang's body turned completely green. The second stage of the Burning Heavens Trio, green flames, burning heavens. Instantly, Chu Mu felt that the terrifying heat, which made it difficult for him to get close to Lai Kongyang, had disappeared. However, Chu Mu's expression became even more solemn. The heat didn't disappear. Instead, it was being absorbed into the green flames. This meant that the temperature of the green flames on Lai Kongyang's body was even higher than before. It was even more terrifying. The current Lai Kongyang was even more powerful. The 60% increase in the power of the fire element was almost terrifying. Chu Mu let out a heavy sigh. The current Lai Kongyang was indeed very terrifying. His strength was much stronger than before. However, Yi Shiwen still had the opportunity to get close to him. Just now, the flames on Lai Kongyang's body were too hot. If Chu Mu had gotten close, he would have had to divert part of his strength to resist the terrifying heat. This would have caused his strength to decrease imperceptibly, and he would be at a disadvantage in the battle against Lai Kongyang. Of course, Chu Mu was also confident that he wouldn't be defeated by Lai Kongyang's sword. It was just that he would be in a more difficult situation. Lai Kongyang obviously understood this point as well. However, he still chose to use the second stage of the Burning Heavens trio. He wanted to defeat Chu Mu with absolute strength. He didn't want both of them to suffer. If it wasn't for the fact that he hadn't mastered the third stage of the Burning Heavens trio and couldn't complete it, he would have directly used the third stage to increase his strength. As he swung his sword, Lai Kongyang once again used the incomplete sword skill, Burning Phoenix Break. A sharp and clear cry resounded through the heavens and earth. The illusion of a phoenix appeared once again. It seemed to be clearer than before. Moreover, this phoenix was completely green. The green flames burned fiercely, but the surroundings couldn't feel any heat. Everyone knew that this was because the high temperature was all concentrated in the green flames. Once one was hit by the green phoenix, the outcome would be absolutely terrifying. They would instantly turn into ashes. The green phoenix illusion rushed towards Chu Mu with a boom. It shook the void and burned the heavens and earth. Chu Mu slashed out a crescent moon. As expected, the collision between the crescent moon and the burning phoenix break ended with the crescent moon shattering. The green phoenix illusion, which had shrunk by 30%, still rushed towards Chu Mu at an even faster speed. The green phoenix illusion quickly enlarged in front of Chu Mu. Chu Mu once again swung his sword and attacked with the crescent moon. After a short pause, he once again slashed out with the crescent moon. After 2 consecutive crescent moon attacks, the green phoenix illusion was finally destroyed. It turned into green flames that filled the sky. Chu Mu hurriedly used the flying swan illusory steps to dodge. The green flames landed on the ground. Instantly, the seal was burned through. The hard floor was burned through like bubbles. Countless ripples appeared on the seal in the surroundings. It was so dense that it was like a rainstorm falling into a calm lake. It made people worry if the seal would be broken. The burning phoenix break, the second movement of the Burning Heaven trio, was so powerful that it made countless people gasp. They were worried for Chu Mu. Lai Kongyang in this state was too terrifying. Lai Kongyang knew that he didn't have much time left. He had to make good use of it. Once again, he attacked with the Burning Phoenix Break. Burning Phoenix Break was his most powerful sword skill. As for Flame Cut and Cyan Flame Cut, they were just sword skills created based on the sword momentum. Although they were more powerful with 10% of sword intent, they were still incomparable to Burning Phoenix Break. The green phoenix illusion appeared again. Countless people's hearts almost stopped beating. They all looked at Chu Mu nervously. Chu Mu hastily used Fei Hong illusory space steps to quickly move. The second level of Fei Hong illusory space steps seemed to be advancing and retreating. However, he discovered that the Cyan Phoenix seemed to be able to determine whether it was real or fake. It wasn't confused at all as it charged towards Chu Mu. Chu Mu's speed was extremely fast. The green phoenix illusion was also very fast. It locked onto Chu Mu from afar. No matter how Chu Mu dodged, it didn't show any signs of missing. It was as if it was a real phoenix. Lai Kongyang stared at Chu Mu. The green flames in his eyes burned fiercely. Immediately after, he waved his sword again. Another green phoenix illusion condensed under the sword. It spread its wings and soared into the sky. After a turn, it locked onto Chu Mu and swooped down. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qijin. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 473. Lai Kongyang seemed to feel that this was not enough. He waved his sword again, and a third cyan phoenix shadow appeared. It spread its wings and rushed out, circling around and attacking Chu Mu from the side. From the left, from the right, and from the sky, there was a cyan phoenix shadow rushing out from 3 different directions. The people of the great Kuin Sword Palace immediately turned pale and stood up one by one. Even though they knew that Elder Long would save Chu Mu at the most crucial moment, they were still worried. The cyan phoenix's terror was unimaginable. Not to mention being hit, even the slightest bit of impact would cause one to be severely injured. Elder Long was also prepared. His eyes flickered as he stared below. Once Chu Mu was in danger, he would immediately intervene. Otherwise, the Eastern Sword region would suffer a great loss. Seeing that Chu Mu was about to be hit by the 3 cyan phoenix shadows, the cyan flame in Lai Kongyang's eyes flickered and dimmed as if it was about to be extinguished. A smile also appeared on his face. He knew that Chu Mu had nowhere to run. Perhaps his footwork was amazing, but he would not be able to avoid the pursuit of the 3 phoenix shadows. Lai Kongyang was 100% confident about this. He also knew that Chu Mu wouldn't die. In fact, he wouldn't even be injured. However, that didn't matter because as long as he defeated Chu Mu, everything would be fine. This was him defeating Chu Mu with absolute strength. The crown of Sword Hero King would still be on his head. After this, he would break through to the Qi High Realm. Because he had accumulated enough strength, Lai Kongyang felt that he could no longer suppress it. Therefore, he wanted to defeat Chu Mu with absolute strength and let the Eastern Sword region know that his position as the King of Sword Heroes was unshakable. He wanted to break through the Qi High Realm and enter the 9th Transformation Realm. When that time came, he would be able to break through the 9th Transformation Realm and reach the Origin Realm faster. Only then would he be qualified to enter the Central Sword region again and compete with the true young swordsman. Chu Mu was only a stepping stone for him to break through. Everyone from the great Qian Sword Mansion clenched their fists tightly as excitement filled their faces. With Lai Kongyang's victory, this year's Battle of Providence would come to an end. Just like the previous years, the great Qian Sword Mansion would emerge victorious. Not only would this allow the great Qian Sword Mansion to obtain more power of providence, it would also greatly motivate the great Qian Sword Mansion. This would motivate the great Qian Sword Mansion's students to work even harder in their cultivation and improve by leaps and bounds. As expected, compared to Lai Kongyang, Chu Mu is still not enough. Although Chu Mu is extremely talented, he doesn't have enough time. The spectators all sighed. Although the Eastern Sage, Hall Palace Master, and the others who were hiding in the shadows didn't say anything, their thoughts were more or less the same. They felt that this time around, Chu Mu would definitely lose. However, they all thought that Chu Mu was too young, and that he had only become a sword hero for a short period of time. If he had become a sword hero a few years earlier, the chances of him defeating Lai Kongyang would have been much higher. However, this didn't affect Chu Mu's position in their hearts. As expected, Chu Mu gave up on dodging. He stood on the spot as if he was going to let the 3 green phoenixes attack him. Lai Kongyang, you are indeed very strong, Chu Mu said softly with a sincere smile on his face. In the next moment, just when everyone thought that Chu Mu would definitely lose and Elder Long was about to make a move, there was a loud boom that seemed to shake the heavens and earth. What? Impossible. This can't be real. All sorts of exclamations rang out uncontrollably. Every single one of them was extremely sharp. Their eyes were wide open, and the smile on Lai Kongyang's face froze. The green flames in his eyes were at their weakest, and they were filled with disbelief. What was that? Sword intent. Chu Mu was bursting with sword intent that soared into the heavens. They already knew that Chu Mu possessed sword intent, and Lai Kongyang had also personally experienced it. However, at this moment, Chu Mu wasn't bursting with 10% sword intent, but 12%. When he attacked, 3 dark, golden crescent moons that were a few meters long tore through the air and slashed towards the left, right and top. 3 crescent moons. With popping sounds, the 3 green phoenixes were all shattered by the crescent moons. After they were shattered, the crescent moons exploded and turned into a dark, golden membrane that blocked the impact of the green flames. In the end, the green flames and dark, golden flames disappeared without a trace. This. Lai Kongyang stared at Chumu in a daze. The green flames on his body rose and fell, just like his current mood. Elder Long released his sword fingers, and a smile appeared on his old-fashioned face. The people from the East Sanctuary also, secretly, heaved a sigh of relief. At the same time, they paid more attention to Chumu. The people from the Great Kuin Sword Palace also heaved a sigh of relief. However, their bodies were tense and their blood was boiling. If not for the occasion, they would have already shouted loudly. 12% sword intent. Chumu shouldn't lose, right? Bailey Jiang said after a long time. However, the word Win kept lingering in his heart as if it was about to rush out. The difference between a 12% sword intent and a 10% sword intent was very obvious. Originally, Chumu wanted to hold back, but Lai Kongyang was too strong, so he couldn't hold back. A 12% crescent moons could break the green phoenix's shadows and block the impact of the green flames. So Chumu wasn't affected at all. Lai Kongyang, I will defeat you in your strongest state and make you accept your loss wholeheartedly, Chumu said firmly as he waved the monster-slaying sword and pointed it at Lai Kongyang. Let's see how you will defeat me. Lai Kongyang shouted. The green flames on his body, which were almost extinguished, sprang up like oil was poured on them. They burned fiercely as if they wanted to burn the sky. Lai Kongyang was very clear that the green flames around him were terrifyingly hot. Not only did they possess terrifying might, but they were also the best defense. Even if the crescent moons struck him, the crescent moons would be destroyed by the sky-burning green flames and would not be able to deal any real damage to Lai Kongyang. Even a peak-grade sword would soften under such terrifyingly high temperatures. After some time, it would turn into red-hot iron. Once the sky-burning triplet reached the 3rd layer, the flames could directly melt a peak-grade sword into molten iron. Whoosh! Chumu's figure seemed to be retreating. However, he was actually charging at Lai Kongyang at an extremely fast speed. His movements were as unpredictable as a white cloud. Unpredictable. In just a flash, Chumu appeared before Lai Kongyang. Lai Kongyang stared straight at Chumu. Right now, he was using all his strength to activate the sky-burning triplet secret technique. He did not have any energy left to counterattack or dodge. He could only passively endure Chumu's incoming attack. However, Lai Kongyang believed that with the sky-burning green flames, Chumu's attack would not be effective. If his sword pierced into the green flames, not to mention whether the sword would soften, just the terrifying heat alone would make Chumu unable to hold the sword. Lai Kongyang, accept your defeat, Chumu said in a low voice as he stabbed forward with a monster-slaying sword. It was an ordinary stab that did not seem to have any energy fluctuations. Lai Kongyang could not help but feel puzzled. The spectators were also puzzled. Only Elder Long, who was in the air, was startled at first, then his expression changed greatly. This was because he could vaguely feel the terrifying power contained in Chumu's stab. It was a power that had been compressed to the extreme. It was all compressed within the sword, as if it had become one with the sword when it was forged. Elder Long believed that once this power was unleashed, its might could only be described with the word terrifying. The stab just happened to stop outside the sky-burning green flames. The tip of the sword had only touched the flames for a brief moment, but Chumu felt a terrifying heat quickly spread from the tip of the sword to the body of the sword. At the same time, an indescribable power pierced through the sky-burning green flames, directly piercing through Lai Kongyang's protective sword chi. It then struck the supreme quality armor on Lai Kongyang's body, right where his heart was. An uncontrollable groan rang out. Lai Kongyang only felt as if his heart had been pierced by a sharp sword. Intense pain spread through his entire body. His body swayed and he lost consciousness. His vision turned black, and the green flames in his eyes extinguished. The sky-burning green flames on his body also went out in the blink of an eye due to his loss of control. Blood leaked from the corner of his mouth as Lai Kongyang staggered back a few steps, barely managing to stand firm. He stared with great effort, and his vision was blurry. After a while, this incomparably uncomfortable feeling finally disappeared. However, there was still an incomparable pain in his heart, and even breathing was difficult. "What is this sword skill called?" Lai Kongyang asked with a slightly hoarse voice. "Point kill," Chumu replied indifferently. "Point kill. Thank you for showing mercy." Lai Kongyang still said with difficulty in his hoarse voice. He covered his chest with one hand and didn't dare to breathe too hard. "You win. You are the new Sword Hero King." Lai Kongyang's expression and voice were filled with unconcealable loneliness. As his voice fell, Chumu's fate dragon rushed out from his body and pounced onto Lai Kongyang's body. When it rushed out again, its length broke through again, nearing 15 meters. When the nearly 15-meter-long fate dragon returned to Chumu's side, it didn't enter Chumu's body. Instead, it coiled around Chumu's body and quickly rushed up into the sky. When it reached the highest altitude, the fate dragon raised its head and let out a dragon's roar that resounded throughout the heaven-deciding sword arena. Following that, a fate dragon condensed on each of the 99 sword heroes. For those sword heroes with too little fate, their fate dragons were not only small, but also blurry, as if they would scatter with the wind. As if a king had given the order, each of the 99 fate dragons spat out 1% of their own fate power, and all of them flew towards the fate dragon in the sky above the arena. Chumu's fate dragon quickly swam and swallowed all 99 fate powers. Its body rapidly expanded, and in the blink of an eye it was more than 15 meters long, and then even longer. Finally, Chumu's fate dragon reached nearly 15 meters long. After circling in the sky once, it rushed down and rushed into Chumu's body. Lai Kongyang slowly walked down the arena, and his back seemed a little bleak. The heaven-deciding sword arena was silent. Most of the people looked at Lai Kongyang's figure, and then at Chumu with some reverence. They knew that from now on, the Sword Hero King of the Eastern Sword region was no longer Lai Kongyang, but Chumu. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 474. The 10 heavenly luck swords hovered motionlessly in the air. Each of the 100 sword heroes had a clear or blurry luck dragon circling around them. They soared into the sky and quickly charged at the 10 heavenly luck swords. The luck of the sword heroes of the different sword palaces rushed into the heavenly luck swords of their respective sword palaces. In the blink of an eye, the 10 heavenly luck swords turned into 10 luck dragons. 10, 10, 130 meters. Bailey Jiang, his eyes widened as his body trembled. He stammered with great difficulty. The elders could not say a word as their throats moved with difficulty. Chuan Bu-er's eyes, which had been squinting, also opened. They were filled with shock. 130 meters, no, to be precise, 130 meters long luck dragon was soaring above the heaven-extinguishing sword field, letting out soul-shaking dragon roars. 10 meters. Chu Mu smiled from the bottom of his heart. The enormous power of fortune leaving his body made him feel empty all of a sudden, as if he had been hollowed out. Fortunately, his adaptability was extremely strong, and he quickly adapted to it. The enormous mental strength produced by his powerful soul made him feel that the power of fortune he possessed seemed to have increased. He knew that the feeling of growth was real. It was due to the massive power of providence he had received over the past 16 days, nourishing the sliver of power of providence he possessed. Although the growth was not much, it was enough to double Chu Mu's power of providence. The other sword heroes, Luck Dragon, had more or less been nourished as well. However, it was not as obvious as Chu Mu's. The weakest sword heroes did not feel any growth at all. Although I did not obtain first place, I still obtained third place. From now on, the great Kuin Sword Palace's declining situation should change and gradually return to its former glory. Chu Mu glanced at the luck dragons that were 130 meters long and muttered to himself. Thinking about it, for the past 60 years, the great Kuin Sword Palace had always been at the bottom. Previously, their luck dragon had only been 40 meters long. However, this time, it had reached 130 meters long. It had grown by more than 20 meters. Chu Mu alone had obtained nearly 6 feet of destiny power, and the other 9 sword heroes had obtained more than 5 feet of destiny power. Speaking of which, other than Chu Mu, the other 9 sword heroes of the great Kuin Sword Mansion were unable to obtain the power of providence of more than 5 feet. It was all because of Chu Mu's repeated defeats and consecutive victories against strong opponents. This greatly motivated the 9 sword heroes, causing them to be filled with fighting spirit in every battle. They completely disregarded their own injuries and unleashed 120% of their strength. This year's War of Providence had ended with the Great Kuin Sword Estate coming in third place. The Great Qian Sword Estate was still in first place, but they weren't happy at all. It was because the Great Kuin Sword Mansion had made a comeback, because Lai Kongyang had been defeated, and because Chu Mu had won consecutively and eventually replaced Lai Kongyang as the Sword Hero King of the Eastern Sword region. When we return to the Sword Mansion, we will hold a celebratory feast for you. Bailey Jiang, he waved his hand and laughed loudly. His laughter contained excitement that he could not and did not want to hide, as well as a trace of sorrow and detachment that were hidden deeply. Everyone knew the difference between great sorrow and great joy. After everything ended, the heavenly fortune sword returned to Chen Bu, Er's body, and disappeared. The vast power of providence also disappeared without a trace. The people of the great Kuin Sword Mansion didn't leave immediately. Instead, they entered the great Kuin Garden. Chu Mu, this time it was all thanks to you. An elder was extremely excited. You can't say that. Without the 9 senior brothers, I wouldn't have been able to do much by myself, Chu Mu said with a smile. No, junior brother Chu. If you hadn't incited our fighting spirit with your consecutive victories, our morale would have been low, and we would have lost even more miserably, Jiang Lycan said with a smile. I'll go borrow the East Sage Palace's array and send the news back to the Sword Mansion first, Bailey Jiang, he said with a smile. He believed that when the great Kuin Sword Mansion's mansion master and the other elders heard this good news, they would definitely be extremely excited. After some time, the 10 elders in Qinbu were left one after another. Chu Mu and the other 9 sword heroes remained in the pavilion in the middle of the lake in the great Kuin Garden. They drank wine and discussed the battle for providence. They didn't flatter each other. Instead, they talked about their gains in the battle for providence and verified each other's strength. Chu Mu was the strongest. They were completely convinced. Most of the time, the 9 sword heroes asked Chu Mu for guidance. Chu Mu didn't hesitate to teach them. Time passed slowly. Suddenly, a figure walked into the great Kuin Garden. After scanning the area, he quickly walked towards the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Chu Mu was the first to sense it. When he turned around, he was stunned. When the 9 sword heroes saw Chu Mu's expression, they quickly turned around. Their expressions changed drastically. They all stood up and blocked this person. Lai Kongyang, why have you come here? Fu Yunxiao shouted in a deep voice. I am looking for Chu Mu. It has nothing to do with you. Lai Kongyang glanced at the 9 sword heroes indifferently and said as if he didn't care about them. His attitude made the 9 sword heroes' expressions change. They almost exploded. Brother Lai, why are you looking for me? Chu Mu walked over and stopped the 9 sword heroes in time. They weren't a match for Lai Kongyang. They couldn't even take one move. Don't worry. I am not here to find trouble with you. Lai Kongyang looked at Chu Mu and smiled faintly. I just have something to discuss with you. Please. Chu Mu gestured with his hand and said. The 9 sword heroes made way. Lai Kongyang and Chu Mu sat face to face on the chairs in the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Junior brother Chu, I was enlightened by your guidance just now. We will return to our rooms to comprehend first. Fu Yin Xiao and the others were tactful and took the initiative to leave. Senior brothers, please, Chu Mu said. Until now, I still feel like I am in a dream. Lai Kongyang glanced at Chu Mu and looked at the lotus leaves in the lake. His tone became calm. Soon, you will probably break through to the Qi High Realm, right? Chu Mu smiled and said, Soon, I will go into seclusion. Within 3 years, I will definitely appear in the central main sword region. Lai Kongyang retracted his gaze and looked at Chu Mu with a sharp gaze. I hope that in 3 years we will meet again in the central main sword region. We will. Chu Mu's expression was normal. He wasn't affected at all and smiled faintly. How much do you know about the central main sword region? Lai Kongyang retracted his sharp gaze and relaxed. He leaned back on the chair with a casual smile on his face and said slowly, I heard that you have been to the central main sword region. Can you tell me more about it? Chu Mu didn't answer and asked instead. 3 years ago. At that time, I hadn't comprehended the sword intent yet. Lai Kongyang said casually, but at that time I was not weak either. The title of King of Sword Heroes of the Eastern Sword Region had already fallen on my head. Chu Mu listened quietly and didn't say a word. He knew that Lai Kongyang was about to start a conversation. At that time, I thought that there were no suitable opponents in the Eastern Sword Region. So I crossed the Tongming River and entered the central main sword region. Lai Kongyang's casual tone became casual. His gaze also became a bit absent-minded, as if he was immersed in his memories. Did you know? The density of the spirit qi in the central main sword region is 10 times that of our eastern sword region. 10 times. Chu Mu was shocked. The word 10 times made him think of many things. 10 times the amount of spiritual energy. How rich would that be? Just think about it. Living under 10 times the amount of spiritual energy from birth and being constantly nourished, one's body would definitely be purer, and one's cultivation speed would definitely be faster. It would be many times better than a place like the Eastern Sword Domain. Being under 10 times the spirit qi was passed down from generation to generation. With excellent genes and the influence of the environment, there was never a lack of geniuses. One after another, they appeared like bamboo shoots after the rain. No wonder it was said that the central main sword region was the most prosperous gathering place of swordsmen in the ancient sword continent. 10 times the spirit qi. When I found out about this, I was very excited. How many strong swordsmen could be born from this? The moment I crossed the Tongming River, my blood boiled. Lai Kongyang's expression flashed with excitement. From the moment I entered the central main sword region, I used the sword in my hand to challenge all the strong swordsmen in the Sea of Qi realm. I didn't let any of them go. They were all defeated by my sword. Chu Mu nodded. Even though Lai Kongyang was defeated by him in the end, it wasn't because he wasn't strong enough. In fact, he was very strong. Even if the Eastern Sword Region couldn't be compared to the Central Main Sword Region, it was impossible for the King of Sword Heroes of the Eastern Sword Region to not even make a splash when they entered the Central Main Sword Region. I challenged all the way and never lost a single time. I had the thought that the swordsmen of the Central Main Sword Region were just SOSO. Thus, I set up an arena outside of the Tong Tian Sword Tower and said that I only wanted to lose once. Speaking up to here, a bitter smile flashed across Lai Kongyang's face. There was even a trace of unwillingness in his eyes. What I didn't expect was that after I said those words, someone immediately came to fight with me. And the result? Chu Mu was a bit curious. Looking at Lai Kongyang's expression, he seemed to have lost. What Chu Mu was curious about was how he lost. One sword. Lai Kongyang's tone was bitter. Just one sword and I was defeated. One sword. Chu Mu was shocked. His expression changed, and a storm was brewing in his heart. Even if it was Lai Kongyang who hadn't comprehended the sword 3 years ago, he was still not weak. But he was defeated by one sword. My opponent was the same as me. He was also at the peak of the Chi-Hai realm. He was only 27 years old, but he had already comprehended the sword will. That was why he defeated me with one sword. Lai Kongyang said, self-deprecatingly. I only found out later that his name was Gu Xinghan. He became a sword hero at the age of 21 and was known as the Vast Sea Sword Hero. He comprehended the sword will at the age of 25 and was ranked 27 on the Central Main Sword Region's Heavenly Sword Hero list. Chu Mu sucked in a breath of cold air. He became a sword hero at the age of 21 and comprehended the sword will at the age of 25. With such strength, he was only ranked 27 on the Heavenly Sword Hero list. Then, what about those who were ranked before him? I'm not telling you this to prove anything to you. I just want to tell you that one day when you go to the Central Main Sword Region, you must remember not to repeat my mistakes. Lai Kongyang's expression returned to normal. He smiled. Your talent is above mine. I really hope that you can be like this time and trample all the geniuses of the Central Main Sword Region under your feet. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation.